I know I'm human. And if you were all these things, then you just attack me right now. So some of you are still human. This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to. But it's vulnerable out in the open. If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies. Nobody left to kill it. And then it's won.
You son of a bitch, you moved the cemetery, but you left the bodies, didn't you? You son of a bitch, you left the bodies and you only moved the headstones! You only moved the headstones! Why? Why?
What's in the basket?
Stop it. There's no more time. You've got to... Please, stop it. Stop it now. Turn it off. Turn it off. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop
Care of that.
Stan, don't you think you were, well, a little hard on him?
You see that crap? All that horror crap? Things coming out of crates and eating people? Dead people coming back to life? People turning into weeds, for Christ's sake?
Well, yes, I did, but I...
Well, you want them reading that stuff?
Well, no, but...
All right, then. I took care of it. That's why God made fathers, babe. That's why God made fathers.
I hope you rot in hell.
Hello, everyone. We're here for a very special episode. We have 3 guests on here to talk about the legendary horror anthology Creepshow. First, I'm going to introduce Bruce Holecheck from Cinema Arcania and a bunch of commentaries. Also, he's been on this show several times. I'm going to let him take over and introduce the next 2 guests as he is more familiar with them and knows them personally. So here we go.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me back. Great to be here to talk about this one. For future reference, just call me Billy. Everybody does. So I brought 2 guests along who I thought would be pretty appropriate for this episode. First is journalist and author Bryan Senn. He has written 12 books now, including, and I wrote this down so I'd remember the complete title, Golden Horrors, an illustrated critical filmography, 1931 to 1939, and Mummy Movies, a comprehensive guide, as well as the upcoming 80s Horror 101, The Good, the Bad, and the Outrageous. Say hi, Bryan.
Hello.
More importantly, we have
you
Mr.
Stole my, by the way, Bruce, you stole my "you can call me Billy" line. Nice one.
That's how I do. That's what I do. Right. And then, more importantly, we have Mr. Robert Tinnell, award-winning writer, producer, director, responsible for everything from music videos to graphic novels, and multiple feature films, ranging from the Monster Kid horror homage, Frankenstein and Me, to the recent holiday hit, Feast of the Seven Fishes. And his career actually began as a production assistant on Creepshow itself.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's going to be interesting to take this trip down memory lane.
Yeah, and again, thanks, guys, for doing this with us. Hopefully it's a fun time. So I guess first, we should talk a bit. I always like to put these movies in context when we talk about them. So really the big deal about Creepshow was it was this sort of meeting of the big 3 names in horror at the time. But I guess we should talk a little bit about the background of people like George Romero and what brought them up to this. It's important to remember that we see Night of the Living Dead as a sort of cornerstone of modern horror these days, but it's important to remember that at the time it wasn't necessarily immediately influential or even immediately successful for George himself. So like throughout the 70s, George was still toiling away, in between feature films, trying to get one that really would help put him on the map. And he was still doing documentaries and industrials, and all this stuff. Meanwhile, doing films like, I know he didn't want to be typecast as a horror director, so he did the counterculture movie, There's Always Vanilla, which I actually really like. And then he did some more genre-esque pieces like Season of the Witch. He did The Crazies. But he didn't really hit pay dirt again until Dawn of the Dead. Martin is a great, fantastic film. Probably one of his best. I usually rank that or Dawn of the Dead. They kind of teeter back and forth between which one I think is his best film. But he didn't really have a major success until Dawn of the Dead. Now, Brian and Bob, you guys were around then. I mean, you guys were teenagers in the 70s. What were your thoughts about Romero at the time? Was he even on anybody's radar before Dawn of the Dead? And then, what was the opinion after Dawn of the Dead?
There's so much to unpack from what you just said. I have opinions on so many things. For me, Martin, I have a Martin story. And I will say that I don't think Martin's just a great horror film. I actually think it's a great American film. I think it's actually an incredibly specific, observant, it's something really special and sophisticated. And I think There's Always Vanilla that you mentioned, if that had gone through the studios and had Dustin Hoffman and Catherine Ross, it's getting nominated for everything. Mm-hmm. And Ray Lane was a great actor. It's just suffering, from not having a star. I talked a lot to George about those things, and we can circle back on that. But to the part of your question, for me, what was so remarkable was the fact that George was making movies within 80 miles of my house. It was inconceivable. Other than John Waters, I would need someone to explain to me who was the regional filmmaker at this level of success anywhere in America outside of New York and LA. And I don't think Larry Buchanan makes that cut. No disrespect intended. And John Waters really is doing something different at that point. You know, it was almost performance art as much as it was. But George was making, you know, real films. And ironically, because how spotty distribution was for TV, I didn't see Night, I think, until after I saw Dawn, because it just wasn't on TV when I could see it. And the first Romero film that I saw was Martin at a convention the night before I met George and Tom and Mike Warnick for the first time. And I always say I went into that screening a kid and I came out transformed. I didn't know films could, I didn't quite realize that genre could be that smart at that point in my life. I just was blown away.
Well, to your question there, Bruce, yeah, I grew up in the 70s, graduated high school in 1980. So I had actually all through the 70s, I had never really heard of George Romero. I knew Night of the Living Dead was out there somewhere. I didn't see it until the early 80s on video. So, you know, I was kind of late to the party, but I think that was pretty typical. I don't think, like you said, I don't think George Romero was really on the radar back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so, and I think it was the 80s when, well, after Dawn, of course, but then into the 80s when he kind of exploded, you know, covered a lot of it thanks to Fangoria magazine, you know, being covered in all the mags at the time. But yeah, I mean, it was, I was in the dark.
Yeah, and it's funny that, you know, after the runaway success of Dawn of the Dead, you know, not just in the US, but internationally, it was a smash. You know, Germany, Japan, Italy, everywhere, you know, huge smash. He then turned around and once again tried to make himself not pigeonholed as a genre director. And that's where he came up with Night Riders, which I don't know why anyone would have ever thought that that would be a commercial hit. I think Night Riders is, again, absolutely fantastic film. One of my favorite Romeros. But yeah, the commercial possibilities of that seem rather limited to me.
That's a classic story, though. It's the King Arthur legend. It's
right.
You know.
Well, I think as so often the case, and I, you know, in the last couple of years before George passed, I was spending a lot of time with him and talking to him a lot. I'm still essentially the director of his film program. And, you know, which I feel burdened with, you know, I feel responsibility. And we talked a lot because Night Riders is the first feature film I ever did and the first one on which I ever drew a paycheck. But it was just being an extra. I would like drive 250 miles round trip to be an extra. And it was mind blowing. I have a suit of armor from the film. Like I'm very, you know, very, very lucky. But, you know, again, a lot of times it's just where did the cards fall? I don't know that the film was particularly marketed well. I think UFD were a little out of their comfort zone with it. But I'm with you. It's like this, he was ahead of himself. I mean, I actually look at that film now and I think about, you know, when people talk about Second Life and people creating these virtual worlds they're living in. I mean, he's kind of anticipating that, you know, I'm going to build a reality and I'm going to inhabit it. Yeah, he just, you know, he's such a great mind, such a great mind.
So what was your time like on Night Riders?
Jaw-dropping. It was a real family atmosphere. I mean, one of the things when I'm directing or producing or whatever, our sets tend to be happy places, supportive places, not a lot of screaming, yelling, carrying on, because I wasn't raised that. I've been on those kind of sets. But George's sets were like going to a family reunion or going to like a 4th of July picnic, you know? It was just always such a warm and low-key place. He didn't like having around screamers and, you know, I remember on Creepshow, we got a couple of ADs were shown the door. And I think, you know, I don't want to slander anybody, but I think because of attitude, behavior, you know, it's just George didn't like that. Night Riders just was so low key. It reminded me of being, I wasn't there that long. I don't want to misrepresent that. Just several days though. the nearest I can say was like when I was at summer camp. It felt like camp, you know?
Right.
And there was no line between you and the cast, or you just wandered around and everybody would just talk and have a good time. And it was really kind of, honestly, what you see on the screen is kind of the vibe behind the scenes in my limited experience on that.
Right. Yeah, I know Savini has kind of described it similarly to that, as just being like the best summer of his life, just hanging out with his friends, driving motorcycles, getting in duels, and, just having just a great old time.
He always explained it as Halloween, right? He always said that it was like going away on Halloween, all the movies with Romero and stuff like that, just dressing up and doing all these costumes and everything like that. I think that's why people are drawn to Romero's world, because it does seem like a family atmosphere in a lot of his early work.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you do have a repeat of, he liked to use the same cast, like to use the same crew, so you see these familiar faces pop up time and time again. Now, Dave, I know you consider Romero your favorite director. Is there anything you want to say about his 70s films before we get into this period?
I probably knew what Night of the Living Dead was, just because I'm a little younger than you guys. I was born in '86, right. And my grandfather always bring down tapes, and I had a tape of Night of the Living Dead. So, it was just something that, anybody's going to let you watch. It's black and white. It's a classic. So I watched that, and I didn't see Dawn of the Dead until I was about 10 years old. And that one I actually had to track down, and I just went back, started seeing Martin and the Crazies, and I'd always had an affinity for them. And that's what I guess leading up to Creepshow, they just seem a little bit different. They have a certain look of the film stock, he used a lot of library music in those early movies, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's kind of like a comparison when I noticed going back and watching Cronenberg's early movies. There's a lot of library music in that. They just kind of have a weird similarity to them. And it's just, I guess I have an affinity for that kind of stuff because it was ingrained in my head, seeing that stuff so much at a young age. I watched Dawn of the Dead probably 100 times, right? I think everybody has that loves movies. But yeah, that just always felt like there was a family kind of thing. And I learned a lot from Romero's movies. It's weird. It's like, it seems like when you're watching Dawn of the Dead and how they show like racism and stuff like in that movie, and you just know that all the characters are appalled by it. It just honestly, just growing up young and stuff, that had a lot of influence on me, how I saw the world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, growing up in the 80s, I mean, I always felt like Night of the Living Dead was something that was always there. It was, it wasn't a problem to see. It was always on TV. There was a million videotapes of it everywhere. We had always read about it in Fangoria and Gore Zone and things like that. Funny enough, when I first rented Dawn of the Dead at probably age 8 or 9 or something, because it was recommended by the guy at the local video store. I rented that and took it home, and funny enough, very similar to the opening of Creepshow, I was watching it with, in the main room, and of course, Dad walks in as the raid on the opening ghetto house, the ghetto building, is happening. And yeah, as soon as he saw exploding heads and people getting bit, he's like, nope, and just went and turned it off. He's like, what is, this stuff's too gross. So immediately shutting down the art. So yeah, I can sympathize with little Joe Hill in Creepshow, whose dad's throwing away his comics. So before we get into Creepshow, I do think that one of the interesting things about George's 70s work is almost, I think George's style is almost a lack of style. I always felt that George, he was never necessarily a flashy director. I always felt like he found his films, at least in that 70s period, in the editing room. I always feel like, he cut all his own films up until Knight Rider, where he had Pasquale Booba come in and help out. But all those 70s things he cut himself. And I really think that is one of the most telltale signs that you're watching a George Romero film, is the sort of syncopations and the rhythms that he finds in the editing style. The way he kind of pulls these characters' performances out via editing.
Well, it's interesting, Bruce, because George a lot of times cut those films on 16 millimeter, even though they were shot 35, because they had the gear. And some of the films, he literally cut with rewinds and a little viewer, so incredibly primitive. But a couple of things to understand about George, and I did a series of interviews with him, lectures that are available to students in his program. And he said, I didn't know what I was doing. He goes, so I just shot everything. And I remember on Creepshow, like he would just, and obviously he's self-deprecating, but literally, he trusted in his script. He said, I usually wrote in what I thought I needed, but then he would just shoot the hell out of it. And then the other thing, he said something to me once that I thought was very interesting. He said, I like to have a comfortable frame so that I'm not, if that actor does that thing that's just spot on, I don't have to, we lost part, or, he gives them a little room to operate, and wasn't, and like one of my other, George, one of the biggest influences in my life. One of the other ones is Terry Fisher. They could not be more dissimilar. and yet they're both, just outstanding in their own way, but just such completely different. George kind of wanted to disappear, whereas Fisher was more, of a tableau, kind of a theatrical vibe. And George didn't even necessarily storyboard, he would just go in and shoot the hell out of it and, rehearse it extensively. I mean, he wanted to just gather as much imagery as he could so he would have options. And it was real deliberate on his part.
Mm-hmm. So the genesis of Creepshow, King and Romero had been trying to work on a project together for a while. After Martin, people went to George to talk to him about possibility of directing Salem's Lot, when that was still scheduled to be a theatrical film as compared to a television thing. And then there was talk with the two of them about The Stand. There was long in the works. Romero wanted to do The Stand with Stephen King. So I guess it was around this time that you got involved with Romero, Bob. Do you want to talk about how you first hooked up with him?
Well, what happened with me was, it was somewhat calculating on my part. I had noticed as a kid, I had gotten real interested in fanzines. I started becoming aware that there was this community, probably as early as like 73. I think Dick Clemenson from Little Shop of Horrors, and I think we first corresponded about 1973, 74. And so I started understanding there, and gradually it extended to things like Gore Creatures, which became Midnight Marquee. But among two people I stumbled over were Fred Olin Ray, who became a friend, and I worked for at one point, and Sam Irvin, who did a fanzine called Bizarre. And I was like, both these guys, and Don Dohler, who really did marvelous things. Whatever you think of the films, it's really kind of remarkable what Don did. Mm-hmm. Creating Alien Factor and it getting this big TV deal. It was a big deal. And so I said, man, one thing I'm noticing is the through line here is you do a fanzine, you can kind of start to make industry connections. And I certainly didn't have some grand vision, but I had a sense that, that building community and a network of support was probably a good idea. And so I had decided I was going to do a fanzine. I went to this convention in 1978, Fantasy Film Celebrity Con, and I met George, Carrie O'Quinn from Starlog, Forey Ackerman, Tom Savini, and Mike Gornick, George's DP, and a guy who George would tell you radically helped overhaul. He helped raise the quality of George's films with sound and picture, and George would have told you that without hesitation. Mm-hmm. And Mike was particularly good to me, and so I said, "Hey, can I interview you?" And so suddenly I had an interview with the DP of Dawn of the Dead in my little fanzine, and I did. I leveraged that fanzine into a job with Questar magazine, which happened to be at 222 Fort Pitt Boulevard on the first floor in George's old offices, and George was on the fifth floor. Rick Catazone's Animators was on the third floor, and so I got myself wedged in there. It enabled me, to work a little bit on Night Riders, but it got me the job on Creepshow. And so I was on a mission, but it wouldn't have happened if George, Tom, and Mike hadn't been so welcoming. Tom would bully the hell out of me. Tom would just torture me when I was a kid. but this is also the same guy that gave junior in high school his home phone number, and when I would call him, would talk to me. I always try never to forget that. When you're dealing with younger people, it's like just little gestures like that can change a kid's life, and it certainly changed my life. And I just had lunch with Tom last week. Like I love that he's still in my life, and it's kind of remarkable, really, if you think about it.
So anthologies at this time were kind of, not really that big of a deal. And it had been a minute since there had been any sort of like big anthology, but before this, I mean, obviously we had the Amicus films in the early 70s, but towards the late 70s, you had some Dan Curtis TV stuff, like Trilogy of Terror and Dead of Night, and a couple odds and ends, like Screams of a Winter Night, which is a little indie regional thing, or that weird cat anthology, the Uncanny, which I'm not really a big fan of. Brian, I think you are a fan of the Uncanny.
Yeah, Peter Cushing and Killer Cats. What's not to love?
John Vernon too.
Shot in Montreal, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
It's definitely a Canadian thing. Yeah. So the idea of a big screen, a relatively big budget, for somebody like Romero. I mean, I think Creepshow's budget was $8 million. So, the idea of that, and then the teaming of the three, who were considered the titans of horror at the time. I mean, you had, Romero, like I said, coming off at least the name value of the big success of Dawn of the Dead. Not necessarily a household name, but he was a name in horror circles. Tom Savini, who at that time was pretty much like the rock star of special effects people. He had come off of not only, Martin and Dawn, but by this point he was the gore king. He had done Maniac, he had done Friday the 13th, he had done The Burning. And, while you may have had people like Rob Bottin and Rick Baker, who may have been better creature artists at the time, or better, makeup technicians, they didn't have the personality that he had. He was out there. He was, front and center. He was the dude that every kid like me growing up reading Fangoria wanted to be. Like he was a full-on rock star. And then you had Stephen King, who was literally a household name, not even with just horror fans, but just in general. I mean, he was the #1 selling author in the world at that time. So the meeting of this trifecta of talent, putting together this crazy EC Comics inspired anthology was really kind of something to get excited for. Like, do you guys remember, like, Brian, like, was there anticipation for this movie at the time? Do you recall? Or
okay, you got to remember, this is 4+ decades ago. I'm not as young as I used to be, and the synapses aren't getting any more malleable. So I honestly do not remember when I first saw Creepshow. I know I didn't see it in the theater, so I'm guessing I saw it on video a few years later.
Right.
So, yeah.
Do you want to remind me why we brought you on the show again?
I'm still trying to figure that out, actually.
I want to mention a story that's kind of... Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, the story I always heard Romero, I think it was Romero said it, he was having like a meeting or something, or John Carpenter came by the set of Creepshow. They just had it was Carpenter, Romero, and like King or something, and Savini in a room, and they were talking, and Romero said, if a bomb went off in this room, it'd be like the whole, like a whole generation of horror makers just dead. Like it would be changed, completely over, or something like that. I can't remember every detail about it, but it was something like that. And I was like, that is so bizarre, to think that connection, right? All those people around at the same time. And just thinking of that, right? And I never really think about the fanzines, because there was all that kind of stuff growing up, but it was different because I had the internet. So the fanzines really did kind of put that trajectory and let people know who Romero was. You couldn't go online and just look up his filmography at that time,
right.
And even early for me, I was going through the books, the little review books, and looking in the back and seeing, that's George Romero did all these, Lucio Fulci did all these, and I try to track them down. So even I was on the tail end of that, and it's kind of crazy to think that all those people involved in that. And Stephen King was such a household name, like that. I always say he's like the suburban whore for your parents. it makes horror fine for people to like.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was reading Stephen King books, and so was my mom. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Yeah.
But I will say that remembering, waiting for the film to come out, being so excited for it to come out, and it actually changed my father's whole opinion of once he saw my name at the end of the movie, he never gave me a hard time about get a real job or go become after that he was like, wow, this is real. It was like it was immortal. But the thing, I think when we were making it, I don't know what I was thinking, but that it seemed bigger when it came out. I guess because it was Warner Brothers, you know what I mean? And it seemed more Plus, in the interim, even between the time we shot and it came out, a bunch of people in the cast started, rising, like Ed, and Ted Danson, and went from, it changed. I mean, in fact, while we were shooting, Body Heat came out. Mm-hmm. Which Ted Danson had a pretty significant role in, and he got a lot of chatter. And it was sort of like, hey, I know that guy. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't, you just watched it sort of unfold.
Right.
In that way. There was just something about it that seemed bigger than I realized when we were shooting, I think.
So what do we want to talk about your duties on the film? For the 6 months you spent there, or do we want to, just go segment by segment, and then if you have any relevant stories, you can bring them up then?
We could certainly do that because I've got a killer one, but it'll show up later in the film. We can do that so I don't steal my own fire.
Good enough. So I guess we'll start with the wraparound segment with Tom Atkins and little Joe Hill, and I think it's actually a good setup for the film because not only does it kind of put the pieces in motion, and it gives you something that every kid can relate to, with the parents, the dad shutting his shit down. I'm sure we all had situations where your parents, this is relating, in the context of this of the story they're telling, it's relating back to memories that kids might have had with EC Comics, reading those, and their parents were like, this is garbage, get rid of that. Whereas, for somebody like me, it was, I can remember taking issues of Fangoria to school and teachers taking those away, being like, this is gross. Or, my parents, actually hearing some of the lyrics to like a Guar record I'm listening to and being like, no, that is not going to fly. So, and our buddy Dan Taylor, he has stories about how his parents wouldn't let him do anything with Planet of the Apes. They thought that was horrible. Or, we have other friends, Kiss, the band Kiss, like lots of parents in the 70s were like, not letting their kids listen to Kiss because it's, they thought it was something satanic. So not only does the opening segment, any fan of horror or whatnot can probably find something pretty relatable in there, but I think it also kind of identifies the film's point of view of, you're supposed to be looking at this from a child's perspective. Essentially, to me, Creepshow is just a big R-rated movie for kids. It's meant to be looked at sort of this just, this silly, goofy, just fun, scary, violent, but always taken tongue-in-cheek. It's done dead serious, but it's meant to be taken in a certain way. It's meant to be taken with a certain mentality. And it's funny going back through the movie. I was trying to think. I'm like, and it's like there's no sex in it. There's some talk of adultery and stuff, but there's no sex. There's no nudity. While I was prepping for this, I was about to say that I didn't think that there's even any F-bombs in it. But then I'm watching it, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, there's a couple. My favorite of which is when the guy drops the quarter during the crate segment, and it rolls under. And I had to turn on the subtitles to make sure I heard what I heard. But yeah, it goes when his quarter rolls through, he just goes, fuck a diddle. I don't even know what that means, but I expect to try to use that as much as humanly possible in the future.
Sounds like a Kingism for sure that you'd read this book and be like, what?
Exactly.
We mention monster kids. You bring up the kids' point of view, but that was a big thing in the 80s. And I know because a lot of the people probably making the movies grew up with famous monsters and EC Comics, but go right into that. You have Funhouse the year before, where the kid is definitely a monster kid, the Tobe Hooper movie. And then you have, of course, Deadly Spawn. There's a monster kid. Neon Maniacs, there's a monster kid. Friday the 13th Part 4, there's a monster kid. Just those people that are always obsessed with monsters and somehow save the day, right? Or somehow relate. This time he's using his powers from the EC Comics to get revenge on his father, you know. Who, of course, Tom Atkins, you know, legendary Pittsburgh actor.
But, you know, I got to tell you, you guys are making me realize I just had really great parents, although at times they were worried, you know, and they were like, I mean, the punishment for me was to take away Dark Shadows when I was a kid. But I remember I actually wrote a line and put it in Frankenstein and Me that Burt Reynolds actually laid it on the mom, because in that movie, it's the mom who doesn't want the kids to dream, you know, because she's trying to protect them. You know, a lot of times it's just parents trying to protect you. They're not. But I remember my dad, I was getting my hair cut, but my dad was standing there because God forbid, you know, it got down too long. And I was like, Dad, when we're done, you know, can I go over here and get a copy of the Monster Times or comic book or something I wanted at the store? And my dad said, that's a waste of money. And he looked at the barber and he said, comic books, Monster magazine. He said, did we do those when we were kids? And my barber said, no, we couldn't afford them. And he goes, but I had a cousin who had some money. His family had a little money and they were buying them. And my dad said, yeah, well, I bet he ended up just being useless. And the guy stopped, he paused, he said, you know, he became a doctor. And my dad was like, God damn it, I'm going to go buy him comic books. You know, like, and it was true. You know, it's like it was all these, like my vocabulary was tremendously improved because, you know, Denny O'Neil or Archie Goodwin were good writers. Or, you know, or because I was reading great articles in the Monster Times or David Peary's Heritage of Horror or whatever.
Right. So do you have any stories about the wraparound segment or Tom Atkins or anything like that?
Yes,
do you remember
I actually have an interesting story about it.
Let me ask you one thing, Bob. It's curious, but Tom Atkins gets no billing in the film. Any idea?
I don't recall that. I honestly, God,
he is not listed in the cast list.
Really?
Very odd. Yeah.
Just a year or so ago, we kind of had a little reunion in Pittsburgh with a bunch of us that worked on the film. We watched it at a theater, and Tom was not there. I don't recall. But I'll tell you what's interesting about the house location. You know, when you're a kid, you're the low person on the totem pole. You just go where they tell you. You know, like I did so many jobs on that movie, it's ridiculous. And we traveled a short distance from our makeshift movie studio complex that we converted an old private school into in Plumboro, outside and east of Pittsburgh. And we didn't drive very far at all to go what was going to be the kid's house. And we pull up to this place to park, and it's adjacent to the neighborhood. And I have the most overwhelming sense of deja vu. I'm like, I've been here before. Like, it's freaking me out. I know where everything is. It's a little airstrip, little mom and pop airport kind of a thing, private. And I'm like, I look at, I think it was Zoot Dwyer. I think it was Rich Dwyer. I think it was George's cousin. And I was like, I'm having this incredible sense of deja vu. I know where everything is. And the guy goes, what are you, a fucking idiot? It's the airstrip from Dawn. It's the Dawn of that airstrip. And I was like, oh shit. You know, it's like, this is holy ground. And they're like, shut up, kid. Pick that up and move it. And you kind of drop down through this little line of trees, and there was the neighborhood. But the other thing I remember, because I got to see I learned so much about how things are done between Tom and, Cletus Anderson, the production designer, brilliant production designer, taught at Carnegie Mellon. I learned so much about, how to fake stuff but for the lightning strikes, there was this, one of the electricians had these giant rubber gloves on, and we were out in the street, and he would bring these two rods together and it would arc, right? It was terrifying, right? But it was blinding, but I mean, as a 19-year-old, I was like, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. So those are what I remember And then Tom and Marty Schiff, I remember doing the garbage truck thing, and then Marty moved to LA around the time I did, and he actually starred in my student film, which was, I was like, yeah, I got the second garbage man from Creepshow in my film.
Correction, that's the first garbage man. Tom Savini is garbage man number 2.
Is he number 2? I promised number 1. There you go.
Brian, any comments on the wraparound, or?
So I've always felt that anthologies, the wraparound's incredibly important because A, it sets the tone. So the film kind of lives and dies by its wraparound.
Right.
And that sets everything. And I think Creepshow's wraparound is absolutely brilliant because, I mean, it's an EC comic literally come to life.
Right.
And it ties everything together from the beginning to the end. Good transitions in the middle. Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons why Creepshow is, in my view, one of the best anthology horrors ever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, right when that music comes on, that music just takes you right there. The music's perfect for the movie, honestly. And the skeleton, right? When they used to get real skeletons. All skeletons come from India. Anybody remember the speech, Return of the Living Dead, right? Who knows why, right? But yeah, that part's brilliant. Using the real skeleton just out the window. And that thing is creepy as hell. I think that it's scary, but like we said, it's kind of for kids, but I think kids would have nightmares, but I don't think it's any gonna decay their brain or anything like that. I think it's the perfect kind of scary movie, and just the whole idea of like kind of having the monster as your friend, right? Because he looks out the window and he sees him out there. But yeah, the whole opening's perfect, like you said. And Tom Atkins is just a very comedic role in that. He's very quotable. God made fathers, babe. God made fathers drinking the beer. Very, very much a product of his time.
Curiously, Stephen King initially did not want any wraparound. He just wanted the stories just to stand by themselves, go from one to the next. And from what I read, Romero actually talked him into it, and then he put it in there, and it works. So yeah,
it's definitely a little bit more appealing. Than I do love the Amicus anthology wraparounds, but they're always so funny and obvious. They'll just be like, "Yes, as a matter of fact, it's a little cold in here," or something like that. It's so obvious, and it's like, I don't remember that at all. And then they look at the camera and they're clearly everybody's already dead. Like 90, you know what I mean? Like every single one of them. But no, it's a little different. I don't think there's ever been a comic wraparound that was. I know they tried it in The Warriors. He wanted to initially, and the director's cut has the comic flipping of the pages, but it just doesn't quite work as well.
No, it doesn't work in The Warriors at all. So I guess that
always said I think Streets of Fire is kind of a comic book or a graphic novel come to life. I mean, I'm full disclosure. I look like an idiot now. That my last screening of Creepshow was the first time I felt like I had enough perspective to truly appreciate the film as a film and not as a personal experience. And it was really enjoyable. My daughter, I don't know how this occurred. My daughter had never seen it, and she was knocked out. She was so proud of me. I don't think I've ever done anything she was so excited about. But she's like, Dad, this is so good. But what I realized, because when we were making the film, like I didn't like the backgrounds, that we did in camera. Like I was like, no, comics are comics, movies are movies. Why are we doing this? And I didn't fully love it. And now I do, because I see tonally but you know how that is too. It's like there's the movie that you think you're making, and then there's what it ends up being. And in the first time you see a movie, you're honestly fighting your preconceived notions of it. It's when I make a commercial or something, I'll say to my clients, watch it 3 times. I don't care what you think the first time. I really care about what you think the second time. Third time, I care a little bit. Fourth time, I don't give a shit what you think. That second time is the most important time, because you've got some perspective.
Right.
And it took me 40 years, I guess, to get some perspective.
Well, yeah, speaking of like the background scrims and, the color flashes and stuff, it really is a stylistic departure for Romero. It's very different from anything he had done at the time. And honestly, it's different than anything else I can think of. It's really stylistically a very unique film. Like even the actual EC Comics adaptations don't play like they're live action comics. George really doubled down on the idea of this being a comic book movie with the frame transitions, the bubbles, the, colored lighting flashing behind people.
But you know what I think, Bruce, if I can, because I don't want to forget to say this. I think George, and we literally had this conversation, he always did what was appropriate. And by appropriate, I mean, appropriate for the content, not appropriate for, Pastor Johnson, the exploding head or whatever. But, what I didn't understand at the time, but came to understand, one of George's big influences as a young person was Michael Powell's Tales of Hoffman.
Right.
Which, along with the Red Shoes, is like incredibly visual, very, it's just not what I would have thought would have been the film that, would have imprinted itself so heavily on him. And so I think there was a part of him that was attracted to the opportunity because it was appropriate to play with color, to play with artifice, to let the medium be the message in a sense. I think that probably was coming to bear to an extent. And he did love EC comic. I mean, he loved that stuff. He loved it. And George was a hell of an artist. He could draw, he could sculpt. Very visual dude.
Yeah, the Powell Pressburger stuff actually makes a lot of sense because you're right. I mean, there's an interview with him on the Criterion release of Tales of Hoffman, where he talks about how him and Martin Scorsese were always vying with each other to get the rental print out from like the local distributor of who could watch it the most. But yeah, like the only other real precursor I could think of stylistically was the Batman television series, again based on a comic book, but with those speech bubbles and those transitions and the backgrounds, popping out. But yeah, it's crazy to me that and you're right, it does. His style for this movie 100% fits the material. It is 100% appropriate. But yeah, it's such a departure from anything else that he had done that, I mean, you do get the feeling that he was really pushing for something with this movie. And I definitely think he succeeded. Do we want to talk about the next segment, or?
I'm good too.
Sure. So next up is Father's Day, which is the first official segment of it. And now this one, I believe, was based on a previously published Stephen King story. 3 of the stories in here were written specifically for the screenplay, whereas 2 of them, I believe, were previously published.
I thought it was the Crate and Jordy Verrill.
It is, yeah.
Is it? Okay, well, whatever. I'll default to you guys.
I know the Crate was, because the Crate was like in Penthouse or something, wasn't it? Right.
And The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill was from a short story of his called Weeds.
Right.
Right.
So Dave, do you want to give us the rundown of Father's Day?
Well, essentially, it's kind of the story of revenge and zombies, right? They all meet there for Father's Day. She murdered her father, who was very abusive, and they're meeting together one last time for Father's Day. And it's kind of the nice little bookend, how it's told and everything like that. It's a very simple story, very EC Comics, very revenge-driven, very, zombies. And I think this one is probably most directly kind of an EC Comics style story out of all of them, really. It feels really much like it. And I know that there was a podcast talking about the graphic novel, like the novel made before it, and they're talking about like kind of how the stories were, like the baseball one. Well, like the actual from EC Comics, about how there was a baseball story where like they cut them up and threw all the legs on like the plates and everything like that.
Oh, right.
And I was like, this is so that, right? The heads on the fucking cake. It's perfect for that kind of thing. And
right.
So I mean, it's pretty simple story of revenge, but very fun.
Great cast for it. I think obviously most of us now know Ed Harris as, we see him as the main star, who really gives a dance scene for the ages. I mean, it almost rivals Crispin Glover in Friday the 13th Part 4. As Mr. Senn is illustrating for us. But yes, so yeah, it's a fun story, a good start to the film. Obviously you don't want to lead with your best story, which some anthologies make the mistake of doing. So yeah, I think it's an appropriate start for it. Good Tom Savini makeup. The one thing I don't like about it is actually Ed Harris's death, where he is lying under the tombstone falls on him, but it's not a case of the zombie pushing the tombstone. It just sort of like magically shifts over and falls on him. Like the zombie somehow has telekinesis or something. It's not
Is-
really.
Is telekinesis too far for somebody's already came back from the dead? I mean, there's no rules in
Right,
place.
yeah,
It doesn't bother
but-
me. You know what I mean? That's kind of like the child. It's like there's zombies. The little girl's controlling the zombie. That happened. Dark Knight of the Scarecrow is the same deal, right? There's
Right.
telekinetic powers and all sorts of things. I know it's weird enough. Maybe
Right.
it's just like a Godzilla movie, right? When they're like, I can buy Godzilla, but the ESP in here is killing me.
Exactly.
I'm with Dave. It's a supernatural revenge. You got zombie, you got telekinetic, you got fallen tombstones. Yeah, it all works. It's like the whole package.
Right. Bob, any stories about Father's Day?
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to elaborate on, just because it'll sort of set the stage, is that there had been a school near Boyce Park, Plum Borough, east of Pittsburgh, right out of Monroe, not far from the mall at all.
Right.
And I think it was called Pan Academy or something. It had a giant gymnasium, and then it had this separate building, maybe 75 yards away, that had a lot of offices, and that was where like all the production offices, the editing suite, editing rooms, everything was there. I think we had 3 editing rooms going at one time. And what we would do is we'd build a set, and maybe, we'd build a set and then shoot there. And then while it was being torn down to build a new set, we would go on location to shoot something else. And so we were hopscotching between the stage and location. What I remember, the very first day of shooting, the very first thing we shot, or that I remember, is that we went across the road and down this hillside, down along this little creek, and Tom set up the Vivica Linfor's, boyfriend that her dad killed. And
Right.
we shot this thing in the face, with Tom shot it with a shotgun. And I mean, for a monster kid, I was like, oh my God, this was the best. But then we went out to Fox Chapel, which is a very well-to-do part of Pittsburgh, to what they call the Dominic Abbott Estate. And most of that, most of the sets were practical for that. We built the graveyard, which was so fun. It was like, oh my God. And I didn't even understand you could do it. And for years, that tombstone that the bug crawls across? I happened to take that one. I got it. When you can take stuff. And my mom started putting it out every year. I was away at film school when she put it out on the porch at Halloween, and kids stole it.
Oh.
I was like, why?
Right.
I could put my kid through college with that tombstone. But it was just so wonderful. And I have a picture. I'll have to show it to you. But there's a picture on that set that it's like Clinton with JFK. It's like me between George and Steve King. And it's like, I can't believe that I have that. I can't believe yeah, it was fun making the fog, and we were putting real maggots on, like John Amplis, was made up.
Right.
So I think someone else at some point actually had the top part on to do the maggots. I can't remember. But yeah, it was like, although at the time when we were shooting it, what it made me think of was like, it was almost like a Naschy movie. The color, and the fog, and it was really leaning into, overt. It wasn't what I thought a George Romero movie was going to be, and it was just odd for me as a kid. I was probably too busy bothering Stephen King, asking him stupid questions about, well, I mean, what do you think about horror, Dracula, Steve? And he'd be like, get away from me,
Was King on the set for most of the movie?
A lot. Yeah, he was around quite a bit. And I seem to remember Bernie Wrightson came to set, if I recall correctly. Like, people just showed up. Like, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's funny because the scene that you mentioned with Aunt Bedelia's boyfriend or lover getting shotgunned, that actually ended up being cut out of the actual theatrical version of the film.
Right.
And weirdly enough, so I had actually had Bernie Wrightson's adaptation of the film before I actually rented the film. I picked it up at the local like Walden Books or B. Dalton or wherever the hell at the local mall when I was a kid. I picked up the Creepshow, and it actually has the illustration of that shot of him getting shot. So when I actually saw the movie, I'm just like, well, wait, where's the part of, him getting shotgun? Because it has his, and then when she goes to visit him in the morgue. So I actually didn't get to see that stuff until like the DVD special editions that came out in the 2000s, where they actually had tracked down the old deleted scenes. So yeah, I always thought that was funny that, Bernie Wrightson's adaptation of Creepshow became, actually had, it must have been from the, I don't know if it was from the original shooting script or what, but it actually had some of the bits that ended up being deleted from the actual final version of the film. And Bernie Wrightson was an interesting guy. I didn't realize that he was actually a Maryland guy. He grew up in Dundalk, not that far from me. And I mean, he went on
ancestors. That's so weird because Colgate Creek that goes through Dundalk is named for like my ancestor who's buried there. This guy's Sir Richard Colgate. My aunt drowned there off of where Colgate Creek hits the bay. That's weird. I didn't know he was from there either. I would have brought it up.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's and I mean, he went on to do, he was one of the co-creators of Swamp Thing, big comics guy. And then, again, with Stephen King, he did the illustrations for Cycle of the Werewolf, which later became Silver Bullet. And, I was always, really enamored with those illustrations as well. There's the one of the werewolf grabbing the cop by the face and like ripping through, and you can see his jaw and stuff. Just really gruesome stuff, but he is a fantastic artist. So yeah, I was in love with
I love his Frankenstein stuff. I love I think it's gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
Silver Bullet, by the way, criminally underrated werewolf film.
It's a great movie.
It's a good movie.
And it's got Wooly in it from Dawn of the Dead. So there we go.
Yeah, right.
Jim, what is it? But some Italian name I can't think of off the top of my head. But we should mention kind of the through line in here of rich people being punished. The second story in here is the only one that's not, right? And he's the poor guy. But there's a lot of rich people being punished. And I'm sure that Romero and King probably took a lot of fun in doing that in their movies.
I bet.
Well, see, thing, I got something to say to that.
Okay.
So at the time, Ronald Reagan elected 1980, his trickle-down economics theme, which didn't really work in the practical, world, and the gulf between richer and poor grew over the course of the 80s, and some of the stats are pretty scary, but I can see that the three original stories that King wrote for the film all involve rich people getting their comeuppance. And so, I could certainly see maybe subconsciously how that was a huge influence. The current political climate and the economic climate in the country could have certainly affected his view of those stories.
Well, and Romero has always kind of been a social filmmaker. He's never been one to like shy away from issues. And there's always been a certain amount of commentary in his films. Even going back to things like There's Always Vanilla, with his talk about abortion and things along those lines. And of course, there's all the talk of Dawn of the Dead being sort of a veiled parody of consumerism.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
I was just going to mention how the weird, how Howard Hughes kind of element pops up in 3 movies from '82 before we get away from the rich thing. So, and the movies are all completely different. We have the South American movie Pure Blood, right, with the old man who's paying all the people to bring him the blood, which is a very bizarre film. It's kind of a Howard Hughes rich man. Then we have Dr. Jekyll and Jekyll and Hyde together again. We have the old man paying for that, and then we of course have E.G. Marshall in the last film here. And it's just such a weird thing that let's bring up Howard Hughes in all these kind of movies, and they're all Howard Hughes style characters, right? The paranoia, the rich money, trying to live forever, right?
Right. So should we jump into Jordy Verrill? I'll take it as a yes.
Sure.
So the next story actually stars Stephen King himself as a man who has a meteor land in his backyard. He goes to investigate with dreams of being able to take it to his local college's Department of Meteors and strike it rich. And unfortunately, fate has different plans in store for him as this meteor sort of brings with it some sort of plant-growing virus that I guess grows. I don't know if it's alien plant life or if it just is accelerating, indigenous plant life or whatever. But either way, it's just not
proper
does
term
not
is
end
meteor
well.
shit. I think that's the
shit,
proper
yeah.
term.
Yeah.
The actual dictionary definition is meteor shit.
Right. So I think this is obviously the comic relief segment of the film. I think it's pretty damn funny. I think Stephen King's a hoot in it. I enjoy this one quite a bit. It's got a couple funny lines. This one, if anything, it's more cartoony than any of the rest of them. But yeah, what are your guys' thoughts?
So this was Stephen King's first, big role in a movie, and so I read a couple interviews with him, and he wasn't really sure if he was going to be able to, be an actor, but he said he was grateful for Romero's guidance, and he said, quote, "It was George's idea that Jordy should become real broad, and it was good for me because it gave me a hook to hang my performance on." And in the context of the story, like you said, in the humorous context, his performance, I think, really works well. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's this kind of, backwoods schlub, and this thing happens to him, and, he does everything he can to try and figure it out and work through it, and it just all goes to hell. And he finally, his luck comes in at the very end when the shotgun actually goes off. So there you go. Right.
My favorite bit's when he's in the bathroom and you just hear him go, "Oh no, not there too." Yeah.
And I love the part where he talks to his dead dad in the mirror as well.
Right.
The internal monologue with his dead dad. It's like, yep.
So I was talking about this, it's funny. I was talking about Creepshow the other day with my buddy Nathaniel Thompson, who's also been a guest on this show a couple times. And he actually said this is his least favorite segment of the film because it feels the least EC Comics like. He said it's not, the other ones are more about characters getting their comeuppance, whereas this one is just some dude and everything turns to shit for no reason. He just has a bad day. But I think it's strong enough, it's funny enough that I don't really have a problem with it. It's not my least favorite segment.
And the set design's brilliant. I mean, the old shack and then everything turning green is just fabulous. Do you got any memories on that, Bob?
It was just awful. I didn't want to see the color green again. My younger brother Jeff, who is my producer now, but he had just graduated from high school, and I got them to hire him for several weeks, and all he did was paint shit green. He was just so over it, and you would see people at a table. There was so much that had to be done. And Brian, I don't think I had it up. It's been more than a minute since you've been to my house, but now I have two framed. I have kind of like outlines for the matte paintings of when the green is going on, like the signs. They're real cool. Wow. The sign,
very cool.
Bangor or Boston or whatever. But we built the exterior of the house. When I say we, by the way, guys, I'm not. I had a million jobs. I mean the crew when I'm saying that. I would not necessarily. There's some things I was very directly involved in and some things I was not. That I was somewhat involved in, and my brother worked on it quite a bit. But we built the house. It probably wasn't even a quarter of a mile from the studio as the crow flies. I think it's a housing development now. And then we built the interior. They built the interior of the house inside the stage. And then we just sort of, shot sequentially. So, you would just add the green, and really we didn't have an issue where we would have to go do other things other than when you transition from day to night, that was a little bit problematic because we have what's called turnarounds. But you know what, a big takeaway for me, and this may not be interesting to you guys, but it was there's so much that goes into filmmaking that, and I don't care how precocious you are as a kid, and I was really into it, and reading, Truffaut on Hitchcock and everything, trying to learn every little thing I could learn. But there's some things that you don't know because they're practical things that are critical to the process, but it would never occur to you because you're trying to figure out how to get somebody to vomit up blood when they're snaking, but, or whatever in your little 8mm movie. And I remember we were shooting and Steven runs up with a bucket of water and goes, "Gotta cool the some bitch off. Gotta cool the some bitch off." And then they go, "Okay, TV version." And he ran up and goes, "Gotta cool the sunbuck off." And I was like this. And I, again, having no sense, would go up to Mike Gornick and go, but don't we like, you have to cut the negative, and like, can you even use this? And he's like, no, man, we'll create this. There'll be another version, another mix for television. And I was just like, I had to go sit down. I was like, you can do that? Like you had no reason to even understand what these deliverables are. And believe me, it's still like that. Like the stuff that we have to deliver on a movie now makes your head hurt, even though it's digital. You have to be able to isolate things for different markets, for whether it's dubbing or whatever. But yeah, that was like my first sort of, oh my God, there are strings attached to this that you have to contractually deal with, and that is physically possible. I just was so clueless.
Right.
The one thing I do notice, sorry, I'm just real quick, is about this one. I think that people that watch Creepshow a lot, that really love the movie, they eventually come around to this one. I think it is the outliner, but I think people that love Creepshow love this one because they kind of just start getting. This is by far the funniest. Yeah. I rewatching this, I crack up when meteor shit. It's just the only thing I'm cackling by myself. It's very hard to laugh by yourself, but the meteor shit gets me every time. I know people are like, oh, it's the goofiest. It's also the most mean-spirited, hands down, because this guy's done nothing to anybody, and you're going to watch this poor. And and I normally don't love that every time, but for some reason, it's got such a mean-spirited, like goofy quality that I can't help but find it incredibly funny. And the ending's the most downbeat. We're expecting a lot of rain, right? Yeah. So it's pretty much the apocalypse, and it starts with this backwoods guy.
Right.
I don't know. I'll probably get slapped for this. But even as a kid, I was like, this is really kind of Lovecrafty. Yeah. And when Lovecraft so much of the time when it's adapted disappoints me. I mean, there are occasionally ones I like, but a lot of times it just doesn't gel. It doesn't work. But that quality, that color out of space quality, yeah, exactly. I'll be in reverse. I think King actually mines Lovecraft for this and makes it filmable in a way that a lot of people have taken a swing and missed. And now, Brian, go ahead and tell me why I'm wrong, because I'm sure you're like...
No, surprisingly, I agree with you on this one, Bob.
Yeah, color out of space is the perfect comparison point for this. But it's, and I do think that if it was played straight, like if they hadn't done this comedically, right, it would have been too depressing.
Yeah,
but the fact,
mean-spirited, yeah,
right, exactly. But the fact that it is so really makes it really kind of, it helps it stick the landing, I think.
Yeah, and I was one of those people you described, Dave. When I first saw the movie, I thought that was the weak outlier. But my opinions completely changed over time as I've watched it a few more times. So absolutely.
Well, one of the things I didn't understand at the time, but came to understand from a lot of conversations with George about something, like George loved like Looney Tunes. Like he loved the idea of 7-minute contained really funny things. Mm-hmm. And so there's almost like a Tex Avery quality to it in a sense, right? And that's deliberate. It's not. Well, I mean, it's deliberate in as much. I mean, there's some things that a filmmaker does because they're imprinted on them, and I have theories on that now. I see things that I was exposed to, plus Tim Lucas putting me on the couch at one point and explaining to me things about my films that I didn't even know I was doing, and he was absolutely right. But realizing just like the first 2 or 3 films that I was exposed to in a theater shaped my sensibility, not necessarily aesthetic, but what I was drawn to thematically. Mm-hmm. And I think that George consciously and unconsciously was often expressing those things. And this to me plays a lot, it's kind of Roadrunner in a sense, Roadrunner and the Coyote. I mean, I don't know.
So speaking of influences, something that I forgot to bring up earlier, when we were talking about, the bold colors and the primary colors and stuff used for this film, do you think Romero had any... Do you think any of that was meant to sort of be a callback to like something like Mario Bava's Black Sabbath, another anthology film? Or do you think that was really in Romero's wheelhouse?
I don't think so. but I can't speak with real authority. I mean, no, I think he was really very much kind of wanted emulating that 4-color process from the books.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was way more. I would be very, very surprised. Not that George would not be a fan of something that Baba had done or Stephen King, but I don't think that would have necessarily been, that he would have been plugged into that to that extent.
Yeah, and the tone of the two, Black Sabbath and Creepshow, are just polar opposite. I mean, very different.
Right.
And even the use of the colors. I mean, one of the things I really like about Creepshow and what Romero did was at the end, as like an exclamation point, there's a color burst behind the character, when he realizes he's going to die or whatever the hell is going to happen. And it's like, oh yeah, damn. And then we get a moment, it's a beat for us to process what's going on. And because of that color, it really sticks.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
It does, Brian. The other thing I think about that, it occurred to me when I last saw the film, again, hadn't seen it in the theater since it came out. And, you don't sit, like, I never watch my work. Like, you see, you were there, you know what I mean? Like, it's not that you're too cool, you're just, I don't know, you just done it, you're tired. But one of the things that occurred to me in those images are, he kind of doing what another famous Pittsburgher did, which was, Andy Warhol, really drawing attention to this kind of vividly colored, iconic sort of, you know what I mean? Absurdly on the nose moment. And I think that was conscious? Not at all, but I think maybe to the same effect, in a sense, like really drawing attention to, you buy Brillo pads. Remember this. It's an interesting thing to think about. Probably means nothing, but makes me feel good to think about it.
So the next segment is something to tide you over. Mr. Senn, would you like to bring us into this one?
So we've got a cuckolded husband played by Leslie Nielsen pre-Airplane. So he is 100% badass and maybe a little touched. In fact, he even says, I keep what's mine, and that may not be sane, but that's what he does. And so he's also a videophile, which is very topical for the time.
Right.
And so he creates this elaborate revenge plot and buries both his wife and her lover up to their necks in the sand and basically sits back and watches on his VCR the tide come in. So,
well, I would like to point out that this was actually after Airplane.
Was it?
Yeah, Airplane was 1980.
Airplane.
Yeah. So strangely, Leslie Nielsen was, he was seen as a serious actor, in the beginning, almost like they tried to push him as a leading man for a while. In the 70s,
oh, yeah, he was definitely a leading man.
In the 70s, he kind of moved into more exploitation-y territory. I mean, I don't think anyone that's ever seen William Girdler's Day of the Animals can forget Leslie Nielsen all juiced up on ozone, wrestling a bear with no shirt on.
He's got a very similar line in that.
Grizzly bear, yes.
He's got a very similar line in that one that he does in Creepshow. He says, "What's mine is mine." You know what I mean? He's like, you know what? I think I'm going to take her. Because
right.
It's something very similar.
So Leslie Nielsen was always kind of seen as a practical joker on set. They talk about that a lot in some of the making of Creepshow, how he had like this fart machine that he would always walk around with. But even though he had done Airplane at this point, he still wasn't typecast as a comedic actor yet. It wasn't really till The Naked Gun that from that point on, nobody could take him seriously. He comes in this, he plays it really straight, a little bit campy, but I think he's good in it. I mean, I think he fits the material perfectly. Ted Danson doesn't play it as campy. Ted Danson actually plays it serious. And again, this was
he's carried up to his neck in the sand. So yes, he's pretty serious.
Right. And this was pre-Cheers. I know in another one of the making ofs, Romero tells this story about how Ted Danson came to him and was like, yeah, I read this script the other day. I think it's this thing about like these guys at a bar. He's like, I don't know. And it's just, and of course it ended up being Cheers, which went for, 30 years or whatever. And then the woman is Galen Ross from Dawn of the Dead, who did not have a huge film career. I mean, she did what, like this, that, and Madman? Like, was she in anything else?
She did documentary films afterwards.
So yeah, again, limited cast, limited locations. But no, so this one, weirdly, I think it's probably my least favorite segment, but that's only because the other segments I think are stronger. It's not that this is a bad segment. But yeah, for some reason, this one just doesn't click with me as much as the others.
This one, like Father's Day, in my opinion, is like pure EC comics from the 1950s.
Right.
I mean, supernatural revenge from beyond the grave. They come back as zombies and, turn the tide, as it were, and bury him. So it's like, it's very self-contained, just boom, boom, boom. It's a great setup. And then supernatural revenge.
Right.
Very satisfying.
You know what I find really weird? In the interviews with King, he mentions Leslie Nielsen's character was supposed to be a producer, like a movie producer. And I don't know if that's lost or maybe he's just misremembering, but that would explain why he has all the video footage and everything like that.
I
and
thought
why
he was a TV producer, not to split hairs, but I think that's why he had.
Yeah.
It was like he was a Bill Paley or somebody like that, like a New York network head who just had this. Because he says, I own 3 miles of it, there's...
Right.
So this is a really rich guy. Plus, video was just so novel. I had only ever seen 2 VCRs, I think, in my life at that point. And Tom was the only person I know that personally owned a video camera. Like, we were doing that kind of a 4-man's video assist when we would do effects. Tom would put his video camera right by Mike's, by the Airflex or whatever we were using. I can't remember now. It's a Panavision, maybe. So we could play back right away. That was like magic. That was just unbelievable that was even possible outside of a TV station or something, or
right.
To my limited West Virginia experience. But we built the interior of the beach house. I didn't go to New Jersey. I could have. I don't remember. I wanted to do something, and I stayed in. I learned a lot about, when they were building that house. It was really cool. Like, I remember like the water worked in the sinks and stuff, like there were things that worked that were really cool. But what I really remember about that was building the tank that we would fill. So like Ted would be in it and then Leslie would be in it,
right.
I mean, and I was scared, I remember thinking, oh my God, what if we mess this up? I've never liked doing stunts. I'm always scared somebody's going to get hurt, and it's never worth it. But I remember that, so vividly. But ironically, it's probably I think it is my least favorite one. But I think partly because the others the atmosphere of the beach house, that modern vibe kind of lost something for me. I don't know. But I still liked it, and Nielsen's just hypnotic to me. I mean, he just so fun.
So funny enough, Dave, you mentioned the other tapes that the guy had there. So in my head, I don't know if I'm looking too deep here or what. I kind of, when he talks about, the maid must have been messing with my tapes again. When he has all those tapes there, for some reason in my head, I immediately went to the fact that, he's done this before.
Oh, Snuff Master over there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like he's, he wants what's his, and if he can't have it, then he's going to get rid of it. And so I thought he had like this whole shelf full of snuff tapes from other women that he's gotten rid of. I have nothing to back that up other than he just seems like a sleazy dude, and that just wouldn't seem out of character.
I would say so. That's the way I always gathered. Like, those are things that pop up in my head when people would argue, like bring that up. I'm like, yeah, that was just something I didn't even question. Like, I don't know why. And then like somebody would argue and I'm like, I never even thought of the opposite. Now, Leslie Nielsen, to me, he steals the show in this short. I love Leslie Nielsen, and seeing him in this is just wonderful. And watching him lose his mind, which is kind of reminiscent of something Romero did later when Rickles dies in Day of the Dead. You watch him actively go from hysterics to fucking horrifying and then I just love that. He does that really well in both those movies. But Leslie Nielsen's perfect for this. I mean, he's my favorite performance in the movie, and he's one of my, really? I love him in this. And this is probably my favorite, probably because Leslie Nielsen, honestly.
Right. Okay. So this was actually the segment that Romero himself edited. Like we had said before, Romero throughout the 70s edited all his own work. Pasquale Buba started helping with Night Riders. He assisted with Night Riders. This film, each segment had different editors, for the most part. So like Pasquale Buba did Jordy Verrill. Romero himself did this. There's a guy, I looked him up beforehand. Did I write the name down? There's a fourth editor attached to this who actually did Father's Day and the E.G. Marshall segment, They're Creeping Up on You. Who apparently this was his only credit. And then The Crate, which is the next segment, which we'll be talking about in a second, was actually cut by Paul Hirsch, who had done the early De Palma stuff. You know, he did Blowout, he did another King adaptation with Carrie, Phantom of the Paradise, and most importantly, he had actually done, by this point, he had done Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, and actually won an Oscar for Star Wars. So I'm not sure how he got involved with editing a segment of Romero's comic book film, which was being independently produced. It wasn't, you know, this movie wasn't funded by Warner Brothers. They picked it up later. So yeah, I'm not sure how he got involved with this, but yeah, I always found it strange that each segment was, you know, they had 4 different editors on this film, but it never feels incoherent. It never feels like stylistically at odds with each other. Like it still feels coherent. Like it still feels like there's a proper feel to the movie. Which I guess brings us to The Crate, which are we all? So you're saying the last segment, Dave, was your favorite. I would say The Crate is probably my favorite.
Mine as well.
Yeah, I feel like, well, do you want to describe The Crate while we're here, Brian?
No, go ahead.
Oh, you son of a bitch. So The Crate is about a man, you know, there's a college professor. There is another, I believe Hal Holbrook's also a college professor.
Colleagues.
And yeah, Hal Holbrook's character has a real bitch of a wife who is berating him at every point. And it's found that in the college they teach at, deep down below a staircase, there is a crate from an ancient Arctic expedition that contains something that none of them are expecting. And that would be a giant fluffy monster that will eat your face off with wild abandon. So yes, probably my favorite segment of the film. I think out of all of the stories in Creepshow, I think this one's the longest, so it gets a little more room to breathe. I feel as though, you know, this movie is not a movie about subtlety or nuance, but I actually feel that this story has the most involved character arcs, we'll say, or story arcs. It feels the most like a more of a complete piece. Do you guys agree? Disagree?
Absolutely. I mean,
Absolutely.
The Hal Holbrook character, the Fritz Weaver character, his friend Dex. I mean, obviously they've got serious backstories. You know, they're not just a cartoon character like Stephen King's was or whatever.
Right.
And even Billy, you know, the shrewish wife, amazingly, I mean, it's very broad, Adrienne Barbeau, but very effective. But also, the more I've seen it, the more I realize, you know, there's more to her than just being a bitch.
Right.
Because there's a couple moments where she says, you know, her expression changes and, you know, what would you do without me, she says, but then also, and what would I do without you? So, I mean,
Right.
there's, you know, it's like they have a history, you know, they were once happy and then things just deteriorated, gone to hell, and now she needs to get her face eaten off. So,
Right. So yeah, I and I agree with that.
very deep.
I agree with that. I definitely think that there are parts of her performance that do showcase that she actually does have some affection for her husband, which kind of makes the story more fucked up as a whole.
Yeah.
I think Hal Holbrook's performance in this is probably my favorite of the film. I think he actually does have a bit of subtlety to his performance. Like, I love that scene where he's kind of, you know, he's pushing her against the crate and she's like, what is this, another Friday night fight? And his face goes from like pure delirium because he's like crazy, murderous craze that he's in, and kind of realizing that, oh, you know, I might have just really fucked up and this is just not going to work out. And then just like it's almost like a bit of regret.
Yeah. Also, like, what the hell am I doing? What have I become? Type thing. Yeah.
Right.
Very
He has
subtle.
some subtlety in his acting when he cracks up too, when he's trying to keep a straight face and he can't keep his smile, which
Right.
That's
happens
weird, yeah.
when you're doing a practical joke sometimes. So it's
Right.
really,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some great stories on this one too, right?
Well, and before one more thing, before that, so the reason why it's so fucked up is, like, unlike some of the other segments where we were talking about, where it's about people getting their comeuppance, like, basically it's just this guy murdering his fucking wife, and, like, he doesn't get comeuppance. You know, he's a murderer here. I mean, couldn't he have just gotten a divorce if he hated her that much? You know, so yeah, it's. To me, it's a wild little story, and it's kind of like, it kind of forces you into, like, this weird perspective. Like, theoretically, you're on his side because she is such a nag, you know, she is so grating. But at the same time, does that make his decisions correct? Probably not.
Well, yeah, it's kind of it kind of fucks you up as a viewer too, because definitely Hal Holbrook is the audience identification figure, and he's the killer in the end.
Right,
I mean,
right.
He doesn't physically do it,
Yeah,
but
and Fritz Weaver is complicit.
Yeah.
And Fritz Weaver is complicit.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like,
Although
you know,
that said, though, Fritz Weaver's performance is actually my personal favorite.
Okay.
Because once
was
he sees
so
the janitors, was he?
He was so kind, so patient, just such a great guy. Like, Holbrook was more standoffish. I didn't really have a relationship with him, but I did. At times I was driving, I would pick up Adrian, and she was the nicest. I mean, I got to tell you, this part of making the movie was the most fun. It was the best time I had. Other than the first time I ever operated a jackhammers, I had to dig the hole that Daryl Ferrucci was in to operate Fluffy, you know, under the steps. We built that set, and man, I got a picture somewhere of me digging that hole. It's Rick Catazone got it for me a couple of years ago. He'd had it like all these years. But you know, the magic, that was a real magical moment, building that basement and the crate. You know, it made me think about things like Horror Express. And you know, I always wonder, you know, you could see Billy, you could see these people in this community being a part of Conjure Life, you know, being a part of what's the British title, Night of the Eagle or whatever, which I love that story so much. And you know, she could kind of, you could it wouldn't be hard to slip into that storyline there,
Right.
And there's a little bit element of it in Something to Tide You Over, really, too, you know, the drowning victims coming back. But it was, you know, to witness Tom do his magic like that was just, you know, for a horror kid, I mean, it was just over. I was over the moon. Everything. Even I remember when the fantasy, you know, when Hal Holbrook shoots her.
Oh yeah, those are
and I was my first. I had seen Tom do a squib in a demonstration once, but this was like the first time I'd seen, you know. Right. And it was just one of those things, like, you know, it's your first time, like you're never gonna, you know, you're never gonna have that first time again. It was just, yeah, every day was an absolute adventure. For that sequence, it was really wonderful. And my friend that I worked with on the film, Rick Brown Jr., like, they would tell us to do stuff, but you didn't know why you were doing it. It was like a need to know basis. You didn't need to know. And his dad was kind of the location manager, and he said one day, he goes, "Okay, boys," and he takes us on a hill behind the studio, and he gives us post hole diggers, right? And you're digging these holes, and then I don't even think we had augers, you know, and then we build this platform. Don't know what it's for. Here, kids, you do this. I mean, two dipshits like Rick and me, we don't even know what we're doing. We build this platform, and then we just walk away. And then one day I see the art department out there, and they're putting this stone face. And then one night, you know, we back up a car and throw the crate off of it. And then magically, with a matte painting and animation, you know, this crate goes into the quarry. It was like, but I didn't know what we were doing, you know, like, it's just like, it was need to know basis. It was like, we didn't need to know anything. Just shut up and go over there, you know. We did. We just did it.
So Bob, you and your friend single-handedly dug that quarry. That's what you're telling me.
I would do anything for my craft, Brian. Yeah.
So Savini has said that, you know, he really relished the opportunity to create the fluffy creature. You know, like I had mentioned before, you know, at this point he was kind of known as, you know, the Sultan of Splatter. So he really wanted to go into more creature work and character work and things like that. You know, it seemed like he was only getting calls for the blood gag. So he loved the fact that, you know, George was making this movie. But he said he really didn't have any idea of what the hell he was doing as far as this creature goes. So he actually said he had to call Rob Bottin and sat on the phone with him for hours as Rob explained to him like all this stuff about mechanics and like things, what to do. And yeah.
We just were talking about that not long ago, and he's like, it still blows his mind how generous Rob Bottin was with him about that. But then I said, you know, I was like, well, you know, Tom, this first-hand recipient of your generosity, you know, my entire adult life. I mean, yeah, you trust me, you paid it forward.
Right.
And yeah, it was just fun to watch that whole thing come together, because his shop was right adjacent to where we were shooting. So I would always go in there and hang out. And Daryl and I were about the same age, and, you know, and just watch, because, you know, a lot of times on movies, there's nothing for you to do.
Right.
And you just got to get out of the way. And I would just go sitting there and, you know, and just absorb.
Well, and he had said that, like, basically him and Daryl Ferrucci, is that his name?
Yeah.
Who was like 17 at the time.
Yeah.
And he said that was the entire crew. That was the entire effects crew, was like him and Daryl.
There was a girl too, Jessie Nathanson, I think was her name.
Okay.
Was on it. But yeah, I think that was about it. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember anybody else.
Yeah,
I could be wrong, you know, because sometimes we were scattered to the wind, you know.
Right. But I mean, basically they had to shoot 6 different stories, you know, all with their own effects. And this is basically, you know, it's an effects driven movie on top of that. You know, every story has effects to it. So yeah, I mean, just the fact that they were able to pump that out is crazy to me. But more power to them.
Oh, and, you know, at some point, I mean, I do. I just don't think you can give enough credit to Rick Catazon. I mean, his designs and the way he kind of did that. And Rick does his own thing, you know. I don't mean this like he was copying. I don't mean it at all. But that kind of fluidity that like Richard Williamson had, you know, with that animated Scrooge from the 70s, which is just stunning.
Right.
But like, you know, when Rick has the camera kind of swoop through a window, and man, that stuff is. It elevates the film, or, you know, or it just it really brings a sense to it that I don't think you could have done if it was just live action.
Right. Yeah, and how fortunate was Romero that literally they were sharing a building. He needed an animator.
Oh yeah.
And literally the office above his was an animator. You know.
It was Rick was up there, and and his assistant was a guy named Ron Friends, who went on to draw Spider-Man now for a gazillion years. Another place that I went and hung out, you know, just annoyed people.
Right.
I just watched. I was just so amazed by what they were doing. It's pretty cool.
So that brings us to the last segment. Dave, do you want to lead us in?
Okay, so the last segment has a Howard Hughes type character living in a high kind of complex apartment building that he owns, from my understanding, and he is invaded by cockroaches. He's very paranoid, he's terrified, and at the same time it kind of has a deal where he just closed down bought out a company, so there's getting phone calls. You also notice the minimalism of the cast. Really, the crate has the only time where it opens up and you see a big cast and everything like this. This one has, 2 actors in present.
Right.
Something That Tied You Over has 3. Father's Day has about 8. You know, Meteor Shit has 2 with O'Malley and King. So it's a very limited cast. As big as the movie looks, it's still on a budget. So yeah, it's about killer cockroaches, killer bug movie. And originally this one wasn't even supposed to get finished, right? They weren't sure they were going to be able to make this one. That was the story, right?
Yeah, there was talk that, you know, they were going to cut this one. They were like, you know, the other ones are good enough. But they kind of, at the last minute, they pushed. They said, look, you know, how cheap do you think we can build this set, you know, and get all this stuff together and do this? And they figured it out and said, you know, we can eke this one through. And I'm glad they did. To me, I think it's a real fun capper. You know, especially after, like we were saying, you know, the crate, to me, is my favorite segment. But to to me, I think this is a fun capper, you know, fun end piece to the anthology. And to me, the oogiest one. I mean, honestly, those goddamn bugs everywhere. Like, I'm fine with bugs if I'm not surprised by them. Like, if I see a bug, fine. If one lands on me from out of nowhere, I might freak out a little bit. If I open up a door or pull off a bed cover and there's 10,000 of them, yeah, fuck that, I'm out. So yeah, watching all those little guys squirm all over the sets and everything in this, it just makes my skin crawl. So I imagine
I got big story about this.
I bet you do, because I can't even imagine. I mean, the stories I've heard about them trying to wrangle these things is just, yeah, out of all of them, this is like, how the hell did this even happen?
One of the last times that I was in front of a group of people with George, someone asked a question about the bugs, and George went, I don't know, ask him. And he pointed at me. Because again, so Rick Brown one day, like, this trailer shows up, right? Like a construction trailer, and it has a window, you know, door and a window. And he's like, all right, boys, you know, put these garbage cans in there, like big, you know, whatever they are, 50-gallon, 65-gallon garbage cans with lids, like Rubbermaid, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then Rick's working on stuff. He cuts this piece of plywood and he cuts these circles to them. And then, like, you know, go to the hardware store, get some dryer vent, and you still don't know what you're doing. You have no idea. Well, what we were building was an exhaust system for the cockroaches that were being gathered in a cave full of bat shit in Trinidad and Tobago. These two guys bring them in, and just tens and tens and tens and thousands of these giant cockroaches from Trinidad and Tobago. And they're living in these garbage cans. It had to be, I forget, it was 90 or 94 degrees. And you had to feed them like rotted banana peels. And guess who got that job? Not the bug experts. And it smelled bad, but the worst part was when you went into that trailer and it's instantly so hot. And at this point, I think it was probably October, November. You know, it was getting late. I know. I think it was October. You'd close the door in that thing, and all you would hear is, you just hear thousands of these and, you know, I was not digging that. And I remember they sent me to some poultry farmer out near Derry, Pennsylvania. They wouldn't even tell you what you were going to get. Just, kid, go here to this address. You know, no cell phones, no nothing. And the guy comes out and he just brings me stacks and stacks and stacks of commercial-sized egg holders. But what they were is that's what you would scoop up the bugs and put them on these egg carton things, and then we would stand outside and shake them so they could go through the vents in the walls and everything like that. And like the urban, you know, legend around Pittsburgh was all those bugs escaped and they're there and what can you do? Man, those bugs didn't escape. They couldn't do 60-degree temperatures, you know, much less snow. And the last day I was on the movie was done. I think they had some Jordy Verrill pickups, but they didn't need a crew, just like Mike and George. It snowed the last day I was there. So, you know, the first day I was there, I think it was like 92 degrees. You know, I mean, that's it was crazy. It was just a big crazy thing. But it was pretty cool. And it was E.G. Marshall, you know, like you knew him. For me, it was because of CBS Radio Mystery Theater. That was my thing with him. And I always thought actually that would have made a great radio play. I think it's, you know what I mean? The theater of the mind of that could have been really, really messed up.
Great little effects. Yeah. Sound effects.
It's pretty cool.
So I read fantastic in this one. Go ahead.
Oh, I read in some article that they used 25,000 cockroaches, and 9,000 were the from Trinidad. And also I read, and tell me if this is true, Bob, but the entire set was basically in a plexiglass box, so there was no escaping.
Absolutely not. No. No. No, but really seriously, it was a gymnasium. I mean, I know when we were done and we tore everything down and pulled everything out, you couldn't miss these bugs, right? They're not like a cockroach, like, you know, that you see in your, you know, Soho apartment in 1988 or Tribeca, you know, like back in the day. These are giant, like palmetto roaches, more like what we had in California. I mean, they weren't going to hide under anything. These things were big. Well, we would have never spent the money on plexiglass. No way.
They did say
I don't know. I never saw it.
They did say they tried to Vaseline the top of the sets, like, so if the roaches did climb up that high, they would hit the Vaseline and theoretically not be able to go over. But I wasn't there.
I don't remember that. I just remember standing on top of a ladder with two of those things outside the set, shaking those bugs, and they were going everywhere.
And it had to stink, right?
What stunk was the rotting banana peels. Gotcha. The garbage that they ate. You know, I don't remember that. You know, I mean, I couldn't have been a bigger dumbass at that age. I don't know. I was like wandering around like a toddler. You know, thank God that George and Mike Gornick were so patient with me, which they were. It was unbelievable gift. Unbelievable gift.
But it does sound like you worked for it, though, Bob.
Yeah.
I earned I got a raise. So I started, it was $300 a week. And we worked, I think, 72 hours a week. And then I got a raise. At some point to $350 a week.
High roller.
Oh, man. And the drinking age in Pittsburgh was not 21, but it was 18 in West Virginia. And I think the only reason I had any money when the movie was over was they would all go out to have fun and I wasn't allowed to go because I was too little. They would say, you're too little. You're a kid. You can't go. And faster.
So, I mean, with that being the last segment, there are a few things I wanted to mention as generalizations about the movie as a whole. One of them I did want to talk about was John Harrison and his score for this. He was also the assistant director for the movie. So originally Romero had said that he basically wanted, again, just use library music. And he had planned on using like a lot of 50s era appropriate music just to kind of give it the correct feel of these, you know, EC comics he was trying to emulate. But he said the problem they were running into was the sound fidelity of them. It was just so thin and tinny that essentially John Harrison would come in and try to create these sort of like bridges or augment them. And it got to the point where they realized they were actually having better luck just doing that. So John was like, hey, you know, how about I write some stuff for this? And he ended up composing most of the score, which is really a solid score when you consider that the movie is, I want to say probably, I feel like the movie's like 75% scored, which is an extremely high amount of music. Plus, with it being, you know, 5 different stories and a wraparound, he basically had to score 5 different movies. So, you know, it's not like he's just using the same themes throughout. He literally had to write separate music for each bit. So I think he's really, you know, did a knockout job with his score for this.
John is so talented and such a great person. I hadn't seen him in such a long time. And we were at George's wake in Toronto. So, you know, it's been several years now. I think I've seen him once since then. But I just enjoyed, you know, and he's looking at me going, I vaguely remember this kid. I mean, I can't stress enough, you know, how low on the totem pole. But he's just a Renaissance guy.
Right.
And it, you know why I think one reason the score works, and one reason I think the film works, I feel like it is permeated with joy. Like, I don't remember people bitching on that movie. It was like everybody just kind of loved it.
Right.
And the score, I mean, it sets a great tone and everything, you know, spooky wise, but it's also just fun. Like, it feels like, you know, you're like Raoul, that's what we call, you know, the creep.
Right.
You know, he's laughing and it's like, you know, yeah, you're meant to laugh. You're meant to enjoy. You're meant to savor this. And I always felt like the score, I know it sounds weird, but for me, I loved listening to it because it made me happy. It feels happy. And that may sound really weird, but I feel like every single principal on that show brought passion and joy to it. It was not just a job, you know, it was really, oh my God, I'm really getting to have this much fun. And I think the score is front and center with that.
Yeah, I think Harrison's underrated in general. I mean, Day of the Dead score, people always talk about Dawn of the Dead, and Day of the Dead scores, I like it better. And I think it has motifs and it fits, you know, it just fits with the movies and the characters and the locations and stuff. I mean, I know it's kind of blasphemy to say that, but I truly feel that way.
I don't think George would have thought it was blasphemous at all. I think he would have agreed with you about that. You know, much as I love the score from Dawn, though, I mean, I love it.
Right.
But you know, I'm at that point in my life that, you know, I'm constantly questioning, you know, why I like things, because sometimes do I like it because it's really good, or is there a nostalgia factor, a personal factor? You know, I always try to wonder, is the Deer Hunter as good as I think it is, or is it because it's such a snapshot of the way the world looked when I was a little kid?
Right.
It's a time machine. You know, I do think I think it's a great film, but I know there are people that just hate it. So, you know, it's all perspective, I guess. There's nothing objective about any of it.
Yeah,
the best thing
it's
ever
funny.
for
I was
me
actually.
I was going to say, the best thing ever for me was my daughter being so proud of that. I mean, everything I've done in my career, and she flipped out for that because she's a little horror junkie. But she's always surprised me. I got to tell you, I love this. Not too long ago, I said, why in the hell is my copy of Picnic at Hanging Rock in your room? And she goes, because I've watched it every week since I was 8 years old. And I'm like, what? She's yeah, it's like my favorite movie. You watched it one night and I took it. And I was like, pretty good parent. You know, I think I'm a pretty good parent.
Well, it's
of course,
funny.
I also let her watch The Haunting when she was 5, and How the West Was Won, and she stood her ground, says, I'm watching it, and, you know.
There you go. So it's funny, you mentioned, you know, trying, you know, if we're only watching these things with nostalgia, and it's before you guys came on, I was actually having the exact same conversation with Dave, just saying how interesting it is, you know, when I go to watch some of these movies for these podcast episodes or audio commentaries or things like that, when I kind of go through them with a bit more of a critical eye, when I'm looking for specific things, you know, wondering if, you know, what I want to discuss, or, you know, paying a bit closer attention to how these things are constructed and what works about them and what doesn't, it's usually a really pleasant surprise. And that was the case with Creepshow. It actually, I think I liked it better than I was expecting to, because as I'm watching it, I'm just like, you know, this really is a fun, very solid movie. You know, the tagline is, you know, the most fun you'll ever have being scared, and I think that's very appropriate. You know, it's
I will say this, I do think this is a film that plays much better on the big screen, much better. And I know there are people, for them it's a VHS touchstone,
right?
But not for me. For me, when seeing it again in a theater after all these years, I was just like, oh my God, right? You know, this was the way it was intended to be seen, not on a box, not even on a 65-inch screen in your bedroom, but like really projected and seen for the theatrical experience that it is. You know, I don't know. But it's really interesting too, you know, the way your relationships with films change. Like, okay, Dracula, Prince of Darkness. Sometimes I watch that film and I just think it's so scary and so cool. And then other times I'll watch it and I'll be like, why did you like it so much? Not that I dislike it, but like, it seems like, you know, your relationships kind of, you know, to the material ebb and flow through the years for different reasons. But I guess that's what makes the whole thing with art, you know, interesting.
Right.
Is our own personal filters. Although, for the record, I do think Dracula, Prince of Darkness is pretty damn good. And I think there's some genuinely scary, a lot of the Hammer stuff I don't find particularly scary. I just love it for other reasons. But that one actually delivers, I think, some real, so I'm not putting it down, you folks out there in YouTube land.
So Brian and Dave, thoughts on Creepshow as a whole?
So I think one of the big appeals for it is, as Bob touched on, it is in the end, it's fun. It's just a fun movie. The stories move. You get retribution at the end. The tone is upbeat. Stephen King, he actually said at one point about writing Creepshow, he said, "My idea would be that the audience would be screaming and laughing at the same time." So it was intentional, this, fun and frightening experience combined in one thing. And I think both King and Romero and Savini and Tinnell nailed it. They just nailed it.
The big four.
That's right.
I carried a lot of heavy stuff on that film. That kid really knew how to carry things.
And Brian, you had mentioned when we talked the other day that you said that Adrienne Barbeau actually had said that this was her favorite film as well.
Yes, she said it was her absolute favorite role. I read her auto bio, which I have right here, and she said, "Of all the films I've done, Billy is my favorite character." and ironically, she said also, you know how Billy, she was always drinking, right? And kind of half in the bag all the time in the film. And she said, "And I've never been drunk in my life, not even tipsy." So that's real acting.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I guess just closing out, what I'd say about Creepshow is I saw it young. It directly connected with me. I ADHD, Ritalin for a long time. So that fast-paced, anthology form just connected with me. And I've always been hooked on short stories like that kind of an anthology pace. I love Tales from the Crypt, based off the same source material in reality. And it's funny that, later on Tales from the Crypt would kind of rip off Creepshow with the skeleton character, because the original Creep Keeper and stuff, they weren't skeletons. And they weren't skeletons until after Creepshow, honestly.
Right.
But no, I just think it's a fantastic movie. I think it's fun. I think it's just desserts. I think it has a great cast. And I think a great cast is always what I'm attached to at a lot of times. And it's Romero working with big actors, and he worked well with them. Worked great with them. The score is fantastic. It's very memorable. It's a great nostalgia piece, but it's also just a great movie. The best movies are movies, personally for me, are movies that I grew up with loving, and I come back to revisit, and they're just as good or better. And Creepshow is one of them.
Yeah, and you're right about the pace too. I mean, it's a 2-hour film, and there is never a point in it where it lags. Like, not even once. You're invested for the entirety of the 2 hours, which is a lot more than I can say about some movies that only run 70 minutes,
Yeah.
So
maybe a Larry Buchanan movie, as mentioned earlier.
Right. Yeah. So now Creepshow was a big hit. Warner Brothers had picked it up after a Cannes screening, and really pushed it out into theaters, and they didn't fuck around either. They, besides the burning rights didn't tie in comic, graphic novel, whatever you want to call it. They were also, it was to the point where I've even found on eBay, they promoted it with actual wax cups at the movie theater. Like, if you bought a soda at the movie theater, it came in a Creepshow cup. Which, and the ones you'll find on eBay are all like they've been sitting around for 40 years. They're all like moldy with like old soda and stuff. They're like disgusting looking. But the fact that Warner Brothers decided to give it that much of a push, I thought was really interesting. And there's actually a YouTube video I found that it shows some people, which weirdly it's local to me, some people from a local comic book store, like with Creepshow shirts, they put Creepshow signs on the side of their car, and they basically went around like a street team, and they're trying to help promote Creepshow, like handing out flyers to people at the mall. And the mall they go to is Golden Ring Mall, which is right here in, it's the outskirts of Baltimore. But that was the movie theater I always went to as a kid. That's where I saw Child's Play, and that's where I saw Die Hard, and Lethal Weapon 2, and all this stuff, and the Friday 13th sequels and Nightmare on Elm Street sequels. So it's so funny to me to see a snapshot of that mall in 1982 as these people dressed up in like costumes are going around trying to get people to go see Creepshow. So I would, I have no idea if that was something else happened nationally. If they had some sort of weird street team marketing that they're trying to push out through comic book stores. But yeah, it's kind of interesting that Warner thought it would be enough of the movie to kind of give it a push. It wasn't something that they buried, something they specifically picked up and thought, yeah, this is good enough. Let's go big with this. And it worked. You know, it grossed over 20 million. And more importantly, I mean, I guess it really kind of spawned a resurgence in anthology films. You know, after this, we got Twilight Zone the movie. We got another Stephen King anthology with Cat's Eye. You know, you got Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, a few years later, which, you know, this movie also kind of created the Tales from the Dark Side TV series. You know, essentially they couldn't use the Creepshow name, so they came up with Tales from the Dark Side, but that's really that Pittsburgh crew doing a TV series. So yeah, it kind of, you know, it has a bit of an interesting legacy. Plus, you know, multiple sequels, and now we have a whole Shudder TV series. You know, it's Creepshow is relevant once again. You know, I mean, some will probably say it hasn't been irrelevant for, you know, the past 40 years since its inception. But yeah, I really think its legacy is, you know, just a testament to the fact that it's a really good movie.
And don't forget the 2 sequels as well.
Right, yeah. Which I really like
sequel
too.
We're gonna keep it one sequel here.
And, you know, I guess, you know, we haven't mentioned Richard Rubenstein, but you really kind of have to. And you know, people have varying opinions about Richard, but he certainly, you know, he helped George leverage his talent in a big way. And I will say, in my experience, Richard was incredibly kind and at that time with me, and encouraging. You know, a kid with my ambitions could not have been sort of brought up into the business under better circumstances. That's a snapshot of a time. I know maybe people have a different opinion in subsequent years, but you know, it was I can't even, it doesn't even seem like it happened to me. It seemed like it happened to somebody else.
Right.
You know, like, it's just, if I put that in a script, people would be like, I don't believe that, you know, but yeah, life kind of worked out that way.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you've had a pretty insane career, you know, post Creepshow. I mean, you know, you worked on the lower end of things with, you know, some Fred Olen Ray movies and whatnot, but I mean, there's points where, you know, you produced multiple movies, including things like, you know, Surf Nazis Must Die or whatever. You produced a goddamn Paula Abdul music video for David Fincher. Like, that's pretty insane. But although, for the record, I thought it was the Paula Abdul video with the dancing cat, which I remembered, but then I realized it wasn't. So it's a little less impressive now. But, you know.
Hey, I got 3 MTV awards for that. What do you want?
But where's the dancing cat?
Yeah, I want a dancing cat, goddammit. But no, and then, I mean, you've directed, you know, several movies that are your movies, you know, things that you've wanted to make, you've wanted to do, you know, you've branched out into graphic novels, you know, that you've written. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's all thanks to Creepshow.
Yeah, my last conversation with George, he had read Feast of the Seven Fishes, and he goes, I love it. I'm so excited about it. You know, I can't wait for you to do this, because he was very familiar with the concept, because a lot of his friends from Pittsburgh, from Clareton area, the Ritchie brothers, some people say Rick Eye, he was familiar with Seven Fishes and everything, Italian American culture, and you know, he was really, really so supportive of that. I always have the lucky moments. I remember one night, before I did Frankenstein and Me, I got to spend an evening with Dario Argento. And we were just having dinner and partying, hanging out in Los Angeles, right before he made Trauma. And we were driving. Somebody else was driving, well, not me. I was sitting with Dario. Sure, and he's like, so what is this a film you want to make? And I pitched Frankenstein and Me, and he loved it. He's like, you must have made this a film. You know, it was like, so it was so cool. Like, I don't even, you know, I don't know how you even quantify that. You know, our generation has had extraordinary opportunities to connect with our movie heroes and our inspirations. Right. I don't know that you'll ever kind of have that again in the way that has occurred. You know, gentlemen, I'm sorry to say I'm going to have to bail, because the reason I look like I'm part of a construction crew, it's because I was actually am part of a construction crew, because my contractors are remodeling our farmhouse. And today's payday, and if I don't go pay them soon, it might be a new Creepshow story where the rotten employer is buried in shallow grave somewhere on his farm.
I was gonna say it's gonna be the Al Adamson story where you're gonna end up buried in cement.
Oh
under
my
a hot
God,
tub.
that's an unbelievable story. That's so awful. That is so awful. Yeah, we'll try to avoid that.
Right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Bob. I definitely appreciate you coming on and doing this.
I love any time I can talk to you guys, and anytime to just perpetuate. I'm still such an enormous fan of George, and I owe him so much. And I do want to say too, man, Mike Gornick brought so much to this movie, and brought a lot. And George would have told you straight up, brought so much to professionalizing the films. I mean, George, he'd say something. He goes, "I get tired of this Maverick things. I want schedules. I want budgets. I want to do things right."
Right.
He wasn't. It was content-wise Maverick. Execution-wise, he wanted to do things professional. He wanted to be a craftsman. He wanted the people that worked with him to be craftsmen, craftspeople. And he's one of the great American filmmakers. And he's one of those guys like Cassavetes that maybe isn't getting mentioned all the time, but I think are just vital, powerful contributors to the evolution of cinema in this country.
Right. No arguments.
Maybe I can get some haters out of this for these absolutes. Thank you guys, and I do apologize. I've got to roll.
No worries.
Thank you for everything.
Take care.
Coming soon. Jolting tales of horror. Creepshow. From the author of Carrie, The Shining, and Cujo. And the creator of Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. You'll scream at ghastly ghouls. Cringe at weird kids. And shiver at the doings of evil doctors.
This is going to be extremely painful, Mr. Verrill.
Creepshow will grab you, grow on you, and give you the creeps.
No, this is going to be an entirely new experience.
Creepshow, the most fun you'll ever have being scared.
I guess we're just going to stop by and have Bryan do some better than worse then. I think Bruce might partake as well, because I thought Bruce was on my side, Creepshow being towards the top of the heap of 1982 movies, but I don't think he has it up there, which is blasphemy to me. But I guess here's a quick game. I'll name a 1982 movie. All you say is which one you prefer. You don't need to go in depth, because you might come on for a show later and spoil everything. So we'll start with Bruce, because he's on the top left for me, and then we'll go right to Bryan, and I'll just say the movie, better or worse, and you guys just say whichever movie you prefer.
Okay.
So I guess we'll start with The Thing.
I mean, The Thing is one of the greatest movies of all time. I like Creepshow a lot. It is not The Thing.
Bryan?
I think The Thing gets the edge over Creepshow. That said, I probably have watched Creepshow more than I have The Thing. So I've returned.
Ditto, I think. Poltergeist.
I like Creepshow more than Poltergeist.
That's a tough one. I'm going to say dead even on that one.
Really?
Yeah.
So here's my thing with Poltergeist. I know Dave hates when I do this, but whatever.
It's 45 minutes. It's a 10-minute segment. It's an hour with Bruce.
So Poltergeist was a movie I loved as a kid. When I got to be a bit older, it became a big, like, oh, studio horror sucks, and Steven Spielberg, he's not a horror guy, blah blah blah. Watching it as I got older, watching it a bit more recently, there's a lot of stuff in there that works, and there's a lot of stuff in there that kind of focuses on childhood fears, like and I really think that there is really a lot of effective stuff in there. There's a lot of kind of like schmaltzy bits in there as well, but I do think Poltergeist is actually probably better than I've given it credit for the last couple decades, and that's all I'll say.
Same boat. Now I'm gonna start doing it. I'm not gonna do this. I'm not getting pulled into Bruce's game here. Halloween 3.
Halloween 3 is better than Creepshow, I think. Maybe. They're close. Look, this last watch of Creepshow, I gave it a 9. I don't know what I would give. I would probably also give Halloween 3 a 9. So it's tough. They both have. Fuck. All right. I'm switching my vote. I might go Creepshow.
Yeah, I would go Creepshow as well. Although I love Halloween 3, it's totally underrated. But Creepshow. Yeah.
So we got kind of a Friday 13th Part 3.
Creepshow.
Creepshow. That's not even a question.
I mean, Creepshow is beating all of them for me except The Thing right now.
Right.
Then we got Tenebrae.
Tenebrae's better.
They're both excellent. I'd go with Creepshow though. Again, just because I'd return to it quicker.
Yeah, I don't know. Tenebrae is my favorite giallo, my favorite Argento. Yeah, it's
It's a rare tie I have. I don't know.
To me, Tenebrae's a 10 and Creepshow's a 9.
They're all 10s. There's not an X amount of how many 10s you can have. I mean, I got The Thing is a 10, Halloween 3 is a 10, Creepshow is a 10, Tenebrae is a 10. So Slumber Party Massacre.
Creepshow. Slumber Party Massacre is good though. I really do. It's a lot of fun. Slumber Party Massacre is one of those few movies that can work both as a parody and as a straight movie. You can view it as a regular slasher, or you can view it as a setup of a slasher, and it works equally as well both ways.
So I'm a big fan of Slumber Party Massacre. I don't know if you guys heard, but when you said Slumber Party Massacre, my wife in the next room giggled. I'm not sure why. I'm a little freaked out, but okay. Creepshow's a better movie, but Slumber Party Massacre is probably my favorite slasher.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Basket Case. Now remember, Art Editor is listening. He's always listening. He's like the evil version of Santa Claus.
Art Editor considers this his favorite movie in 1982, which he is an insane person. I love Basket Case. But do I love like I said, this last viewing of Creepshow really kind of pushed it up pretty high for me, so I'm kind of sitting on a Creepshow high right now. But I still might go Basket Case. It's a little dirtier, a little sleazier, and that's a little more my forte, I feel like.
A little dirtier? A little?
Just a little bit.
Just a smidge, right?
No, Creepshow definitely.
I got hepatitis from watching Basket Case.
Right. Yeah.
I did rewatch Basket Case fairly recently, and I actually did a write-up on it, and I was impressed. I liked it a lot more than I had remembered. So
it's really funny. It's legitimately funny.
Yeah.
Cat People.
I like Creepshow better than Cat People. Cat People's really good though. I think that's actually a pretty underrated 80s horror movie. You don't really hear a lot of talk about that one.
Yeah, Creepshow. I've got some issues with Cat People. I mean, it's good, but despite her obvious attributes, I don't think Nastasia Kinski does justice to the role.
I prefer the original.
I mean, that's not even a question, right? But yeah, I mean, it's got Lynn Lowry. I think it's really stylishly photographed. I like the score. I think there's a lot of good things to Cat People. But yeah, Creepshow's the winner.
Pieces
all the way.
No, Creepshow is a far better film. Pieces is batshit crazy fun. I'll give you that.
I was gonna say, Pieces encapsulates everything I love about Euro horror slasher movies. Just, it's so ridiculous.
White Dog. which is borderline horror.
Yeah, I don't know.
In there. It's just
Yeah,
like, is it really a horror movie?
Yeah, I wouldn't consider White Dog a horror movie. It is damn good though. But I mean, I've watched Creepshow 10 times in my life, maybe more. I've watched White Dog twice. First on bootleg VHS, then when the Criterion came out. I would say Creepshow is more of a favorite. White Dog might be a better actual film. But I don't know. Yeah, I'd still go Creepshow.
Surprisingly, I kind of agree with everything Bruce said, which is freaking me out.
We might as well just end the show here, right?
That's the problem when we're talking about one of the best of 82. Like, it's not going to be like, Extra or a Q where you can be like, back and forth. You're like, it's pretty much where it's at, right? So I guess Q the Winged Serpent.
Creepshow's better, but I really enjoy the hell out of Q. Very quirky, Michael Moriarty, giant monster flying around the Chrysler building. How can you go wrong?
Jesus, twice in a row I agree with Bruce. This is there is something seriously wrong with me. But yes, I'm a big fan of Q as well. Really enjoy it, but Creepshow I'm going to give the edge to.
Here's a heavy hitter, New York Ripper.
I need to rewatch New York Ripper. Based off this recent viewing, I will say Creepshow, but that may change in an upcoming rewatch. We'll see. So,
shockingly, I've never seen New York Ripper, and that's kind of by design. I mean, I've read and I've talked to Bruce about it, and that doesn't endear me any further to actually spending 2 hours of my life on it. So,
yeah, it is sleazy with a capital S.
Yeah, it's not a movie you guilt somebody not seeing. It's not like you're like, you have never seen it. It's like, it ain't for everybody, man. It's called New York Ripper. Like,
next time Brian's here, I'm going to spring it on him. We'll see what happens.
So, Durfan.
I'm going Durfan.
Really?
Absolutely love that movie. I originally got it on VHS as Trance, and it blew me away. Just floored me. And I've loved it ever since. Strangely, I'll save this story for another time. But I tracked down the rights holder and got that to Mondo Macabro, and it took them 10 years to put that out on DVD or on Blu-ray. So I have a history with Trance, but we'll get into that at some later point.
And this one I have not seen. Another one I haven't seen, sadly.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I was gonna say. I think I just told you about this like a couple weeks ago. Yeah, and I was kind of surprised. Well, not really surprised. It is kind of an obscure one, a German film, but it's really good. You need to see it.
It's the best movie called The Fan. It's got two movies competing for against it, but no. They see I was waiting for something to beat Creepshow because you're like Creepshow wasn't even in my top 10 before this show. And then I'm going through all these movies. It's like, what the fuck is better than Creepshow? You're gonna have some wackadoo movies on your list. You're gonna be right.
Ask him about Boarding House.
It's probably on the list.
It probably is. I don't know how I'm going to answer.
Boarding House.
I was going to say I don't know how I'm going to answer that one.
Here's one that's borderline horror: Eating Raoul.
Again, another one I've only watched like twice in my life. Really funny. Love Paul Bartel, both as a director and an actor. And Mary Warnoff as well. But yeah, I think Creepshow is just a little more embedded in my. It kind of goes back to what Bob was talking about with nostalgia. It's kind of hard to tear yourself away from some of these movies. So it's. Yeah, I'm definitely going Creepshow.
Eating Row, I think it would have made a great segment in Creepshow. And actually, I think I'm a fan. I enjoyed it. Love the black humor and, like you said, the performances. But it's a little too long for what it is. It's and so definitely Creepshow.
Yeah, kind of a one joke movie.
Yep. Here's the next one, which is crazy. We should have mentioned that Adrienne Barbeau is the only person to ever work with Craven, Romero, and Carpenter, and alone in the same year. She did a voiceover in The Thing. So, Swamp Thing.
Creepshow's better. Swamp Thing's not bad, though. It's actually kind of fun. Great cast. I mean, you got Nicholas Worth, David Hess, Adrienne Barbeau's.
Yes.
Yes, it's I don't know if it's a great comic book movie. It's definitely not a good Swamp Thing adaptation. But it's kind of fun for a stupid little Wes Craven movie. It's different than what Wes Craven was doing around that time too. yeah, Creepshow all the way, but Swamp Thing's not without his merits.
Yeah, Swamp Thing. No. Creepshow. Definitely.
The Battle of the Rapists in that movie with Nicholsworth and David Hess.
Right.
So, I mean, really, is there anything else that stands out? I mean, Alone in the Dark?
It's funny. We just did the Alone in the Dark episode. I rated, when I watched Alone in the Dark, I gave it an 8, where I gave Creepshow a 9. But I still might say I like Alone in the Dark better. That makes no logical sense. But here we are.
I actually just watched that on Bruce's urging recently, and so my background is psychology. And
oh no!
Yeah, it was hard to get past that.
Right.
So I'm not a huge fan. So definitely Creepshow.
Out of a 1 to 10 rating, what did you give it?
A 6.
Jesus
That's
Christ.
fair. That's a fair rating. No, 6 is not a crappy movie. I mean, like, if you like it but you don't love it.
It's still above average, right? Yeah. All right.
The one that drove me crazy, and I don't have a background in it. I took like one college course, but it drove me so crazy where it was just like, this is complete bullshit. What was that one? They Look Like People, where it's the whole movie where the two characters in a room. It's recent, and like the one guy's like, "Is he crazy? I don't know." And he's crazy, or is he actually seeing the weird creatures? I don't know. It just felt like complete horseshit to me.
I haven't seen that one.
I tapped out. I was
gonna say, it sounds like I don't need to seek it out either.
there was a label that was putting out all these movies from Vinegar Syndrome, and that was one. And I was collecting all of them, like how we do, like we're dumb.
Right.
Like I gotta have it, and they hit that one out, and I was like, tapping out. You got me. I was like, now I'll just go based on which ones I'm picking. I'm hating on this movie. A complete diatribe. Sorry, but Next of Kin.
The Australian one, really good. That's a really solid movie. Really creepy. I'll probably go Creepshow, but Next of Kin is really good. I really, really like that movie.
Yeah, I was surprised how much I enjoyed it too. But yeah, Creepshow has the edge.
That's probably the last one I'll do, unless you guys want to throw another one out. Living Dead Girl. Jean Roland.
I actually have that pulled for a rewatch. It's funny because I haven't watched that movie in like 20 years. I remember liking it, but I also remember it kind of having some pacing issues. But it's Jean Roland, so imagine that. I'm definitely going Creepshow, but I do like Living Dead Girl, and I am looking forward to a rewatch of it.
Not a big Roland fan, but yeah, pacing issues. Bingo.
Right.
Well, there's not zero pacing issues in Zombie Lake. Zero. I like the guy a lot, but Zombie Lake it's fun, but it's crap.
It's funny. So me and Brian, one of our friends is Neil Vokes, who's a comic book artist. Who's actually been a collaborator with Bob Tinnell and a lot of stuff too, like Black Forest and whatever the hell else they've worked on. 1 year for my birthday, he actually gave me this watercolor that he did of Zombie Lake, of one of the skinny dippers with like the Nazi zombies under the water. It's really, really cool. Just watercolor sketch that he did for me for my birthday 1 year. If I had it at the ready, I'd show it, but whatever.
I think maybe there's two more that we should mention. Night Beast, which we met Don Doler. You mentioned Don Doler. And I'm surprised by Bob Tinnell's. He just knew a lot about horror movies. A lot of the people that make them surprisingly don't know that much about them.
Yeah, Bob's a fan. He's even discounting his entire career, he was a fan first and foremost. He grew up watching Hammer movies, and like he said, he went to conventions. He started his own zine. That was Bob. And yeah, at the time, especially Don Doler. I guess we'll get into this more later. Don Doler had a magazine that basically showed you how to do special effects. So if you were even remotely interested in doing filmmaking, if you're making your own backyard movies and stuff, Don Doler's magazine was the one to get, and a lot of filmmakers sort of gravitated to that. That's how he got J.J. Abrams to do the score for Night Beast. So going back to your question, Creepshow is obviously better in every way, shape, and form than Night Beast, but I really love Night Beast. So I'll say Creepshow, but Night Beast is in my heart.
Yeah, Night Beast has some impressive stuff in it, but I mean, you know, an $8 million movie versus an $8,000 movie.
Right, yeah, exactly.
There's no fair comparison.
Right.
So Amityville 2, The Possession. That's the last one I think we'll do.
It's the sleazy one, the dirty one, the incesty one. Creepshow's better, but yeah, Amityville 2 is probably Amityville 2 is probably the best Amityville movie. You know, I can say that. Do you not agree?
So I've seen Amityville 2 exactly one time back when it came out, and have not returned, and I think there's good reason for that. So definitely.
I've only seen it one time too, and I like it, but once they start getting into the cell with religious stuff, I think it falls kind of flat, which is the same kind of stuff how I feel about the Conjuring movies. You know, I just don't, not my thing.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you know, all of these ratings just kind of go to show that Creepshow is, you know, a lot of people just throw the word classic around. But, you know, rewatching it recently, I said, you know what, this does hold up way better than expected. I said, you know, there's really a lot to this movie. And its title of a classic is deserved. You know, it's, you know, sometimes these things are labeled classics because they are classics. You know, it's not just shorthand. You know, it's not just a cheap way out. Like, some of these movies are legitimately really good.
Well, and surprisingly, I mean, it is, you know, it is of its time, but it doesn't feel like it's of its time. I mean, it is almost timeless, and I think it goes right back to the foundation, Stephen King and his stories and his writing. It just stands up. It doesn't matter what era it was made in. It was just great, and it's still great, and it will be great another 30, 40 years from now. So, yeah.
Right.
I should mention one thing that there's a lot of stuff I probably wanted to bring up in there that, you know, I just don't want to cut them off. But the direct correlation between 50s and 80s cinema when I'm watching these, you know what I mean? And it's great that Creepshow fits right into that. The AC comics being recreated into the 80s. We have The Thing, a 51 movie being remade or reimagined or whatever the fuck you want to call it in 1982 as well. And you have like some Night Beast is another kind of throwback to the 50s. The 80s and 50s really start early. And I mean, obviously Alien had some inspiration, big hit in 79, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers 78. But I really think that trajectory was kind of realized more in the early 80s with that kind of throwback to the 50s style film.
Well, and how funny is it that, you know, The Thing from the 50s, The Thing from Another World, is to me probably one of the best 50 sci-fi movies there is. And then the 80s version is one of my all-time favorite movies, you know? So, you know, what are the odds of having two different adaptations of that source being so good? You know, and we saw the same thing with Invasion of the Body Snatchers. You know, Philip Kaufman's is so effing good, but so is the 50s.
Yeah.
David Cronenberg. I was going to say David Cronenberg's The Fly is way better than the original Fly, though.
It is better. I agree with that, but the original is still worthwhile.
The original's a lot of fun.
Right.
And then there's the Blob as well, the Blob remake.
The Blob remake's much better. Like, when people say the 58 Blob, I'm like, you're insane. Like, the other ones I get, like, I could see, like, I prefer 56 Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I do. Really? It's the same movie, and it's shorter, and it's more fast-paced. It's the same exact, you get the same effect, but in, like, 80 minutes. I really feel that way. I mean, I don't know. I think I just like Don Siegel. He's just so kind of matter of fact with his filmmaking. Yeah. But I just can't see the Blob. When people say the 58 Blob, I'm like, that's nostalgia talking to me.
Yeah.
There's
no
Blob
argument
is
there.
Vastly superior to me.
Love the 80s Blob. And that was another one I rewatched when the 4K came out, and I was just like, God, this movie's so good. Like, the effects in that are just outstanding. And I love the story. I love the coda, the epilogue. It's a dark, it's a violent movie. It kills off multiple characters you don't expect it to kill off. It's just, Chuck Russell just nailed it with the Blob remake.
Turns it on its head right in the beginning when instead of killing, the punk biker,
jock,
you kill the jock.
Yeah.
What was I going to mention? Oh, I should mention anthologies. We kind of left out one bit of anthology kind of thing. In South America, they were making a lot of anthologies. In Brazil, those horror movies were anthologies in the early 80s, which is strange because we probably never got them. And the Shaw Brothers had some anthologies in the early 80s as
Oh,
well.
yeah,
Their horror
yeah.
movies were anthologies, and the Criminal series, which I've not
Criminals,
viewed. I know
right.
that's a bunch of those are all anthologies. So it's kind of weird. Like a lot around the world still was doing anthologies, but in terms of American, Monster Club is British production, I believe.
Yeah.
Right? So there
like
wasn't many American ones.
Yeah. Like I said, there was, you got a couple Dan Curtis things for TV, and a couple odds and ends, like, Screams of a Winter's Night. That was, independent. It was this little regional thing. What I do like about that one is that it uses the same cast of actors for all its stories, which is something novel. You don't really see that. I mean, I guess it was kind of their way of doing it cheap. You didn't have to hire a bunch of different people.
Yeah,
right.
Dan Curtis did that, right?
Yeah. He did that in Dead of Night for TV, both of which are really good. But yeah, in the U.S., right, this kind of kickstarted it again for a little bit. And you even got some like cheaper ones too, like From Whisper to a Scream or The Offspring, whatever you want to call it.
That one's great, actually.
Jeff Burr, right? But it's I think the fact that it didn't take long for Twilight Zone. A year later we get Twilight Zone the movie, then a year after that we get Cat's Eye, and it seemed like the success of Creepshow did kind of kickstart another wave of that over here.
Sure. Is there anything anybody else wants to add about Creepshow or anything like that?
No, I think I don't. Do you, Mr. Senn?
I think we've dissected it pretty well.
I would agree.
And it was great hearing Bob's stories, man. That was a ton of fun.
Those were amazing. So is there anything you want to plug?
Brian, plug some books. You've written enough.
You already mentioned Mummy movies. That's my latest. No, that's it. For those skiers in the audience, I wrote a book on ski movies. It's called Ski Films, a comprehensive guide. Well, there you go.
He's not kidding either.
I believe him. I was trying to think of like as many ski movies as I could think, and I was like, well, there's the Hot Dog's a ski movie, right? And then I was like, Better Off Dead has the big scene, and then there's the one Roger Corman where I think like it's a whole war movie around skis,
like
right?
Ski Patrol or whatever. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, that's a really crummy one I watched.
Ski Party, which is the beach party offshoot ski party.
There's like a sex comedy, but it has no sex in it. And I can't remember what it was. It was recently re-put out on Blu-ray. And I was like, this is a sex comedy without sex. I was like, this is one of the... And it just showed me how bad sex comedies are without sex. They are unwatchable. Like, it's just so bad. They're so bad.
Too funny.
I appreciate you coming on. I want to ask you some questions about the Mummy movies because, I was going through 1980 and people just think they think the Universal, they think the Hammer, and they completely forget about it. But when I started 1980, I'm sitting there like I'm watching, The Awakening in 1980. And then there's like a couple other ones too.
There was the Time Walker.
There's the Hunt of King Tut's Tomb, right? There's that one in 1982, I think.
Although King Tut's Tomb does not actually have a mummy in it.
No, it's very boring.
yeah,
it was bad. It was a bad movie.
It is.
It was real bad.
I think nothing worse than a mummy movie without a mummy.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's that one. That's the fourth Hammer mummy too, which is based off the actual Bram Stoker book, right? So it's like it doesn't really have a mummy, but it's kind of a mummy story. Or Manhattan Baby this year doesn't really have a mummy, but it's an Egyptian horror, so might as well be a mummy.
And more importantly, Blood from the Mummy's Tomb has Valerie Leone, who, oh boy, she might be my favorite Hammer glamour horror actress.
Her acting was so bad they had to dub her for the whole.
I was not paying attention to her acting.
Well, they did that in Hammer movies too. They dubbed over Ingrid Pitt, and it's just like, how fucking dare you? There's no bad acting Ingrid Pitt. So I mean, but sometimes the acting sucks so bad they dub. My friend made an indie movie, and I shouldn't say this, but I was on the set, and this person could not remember their lines. So he was like, fuck, after like the third time and it's just miserable. He's like, put on the mask because the character's wearing a mask and just kind of do this and then we'll get your lines later. Just dubbed all the lines. And then people were like, that was a good performance. And he was like, yeah, sure. People don't have any idea sometimes.
Too funny.
Just for the hell of it, give me like 3 or 4 mummy recommendations that people wouldn't know. Like just not the Universal or the Hammers. Something a little people would.
People wouldn't know. I'm a fan of the Brendan Fraser series, to be honest. I mean, those are really good. They're not just big production. They got stuff in them. There's a lot to them.
So
As
devil,
far as the-
devil's
Your one.
stories. Devil Stories on your
No,
list.
Devil
right?
Stories crap. Utter crap.
Crap. I agree. Crappy movie.
I mean, it's got some weird stuff in it, but weird stuff does not a movie make.
Right.
Actually, there's a Brazilian one called Secret of the Mummy.
I just
And
watched that.
You did.
82,
That
right?
actually- yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those Ivan Cardoso things, right?
That's nuts.
It is. It is. And it's got some weird ass humor in it that I'm not sure if it's supposed to translate or doesn't translate or what it is. But it's surprisingly entertaining. I like that one.
Too funny.
Yep. Oh yeah, of course. Thanks, Gina. My wife just chimed in. She watched some of these movies with me. So Bubba Hotep, that's
Right,
brilliant.
Yeah,
I love that movie.
So me and Dan Taylor actually went to see that at the Walters Art Gallery here in Baltimore, like a week or two before it had a wide release. And they showed it because they actually had an Egyptian exhibit going on. So you actually had to walk past real mummies and stuff to get into their auditorium
awesome.
where they showed this mummy movie.
That is very cool.
Yeah.
That's super cool. Bubba Hotep in an art museum. I like
Yeah,
that.
right.
So my weird semi-fascination with mummies is I grew up on the Universal monsters. My grandpa got me into them. And my cousin, he didn't love monsters like I did, but he liked monsters. And you pick your favorite monster like a sports team when you're young. And I was the creature guy. I like Creature and Wolfman. My cousin liked the mummy. And I never knew anyone in my entire life that ever liked fucking mummies. In fact, we just went and saw a band last weekend called Here Comes the Mummies. And they're really weird, and I bought him a dumb Dollar Tree mummy mask, and he wore it the whole time. He wore it. So it's just a strange thing with the mummies. But going through the 80s, it was really fun so far to see the ones that I missed out on, these weird kind of horror movie throwbacks, like Universal movies. And you're like, who would have thought there was this many mummy movies in the 80s, or Dr. Jekyll movies? I'm already watched 5 or 6 Dr. Jekyll movies, and it's only 82.
Right. That's
so
funny.
it's just really cool. I appreciate you guys coming on here. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no,
Anyways,
again,
last words?
thanks for
having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Glad we could do this episode. It was kind of in my head. This was one of those kind of dream things I always wanted to do. I'd love to get Bob on sometime to talk about all about Creepshow, and here we are. So thank you for allowing this to happen. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
Well, you poor old bear. You want me to get some Bengay?
No.
I'll teach you to throw away my comic books. Ready for another shot, Dad?
Meteor ship!